Chapter 594. In the past, Baigong Tianxi had thought that the Divine King clan was just SOSO. If the Baigong family's ancestor had not reached the Divine King realm, they would have become the most powerful family besides the human King Lu family. He believed that the Baigong family's foundation was unimaginable. However, this thought had completely disappeared last night. Emperor Lu Feng, the Yuyo family's monstrous talent Yuyo Ronghua, and the desolate emperor of the primordial Divine King clan, which had been silent for a long time. The foundation of the Divine King clan is indeed not something any first-rate family can compare to. These three people were incomparably dazzling even in the era of the War of the Kings. Now that the three great Divine King clans had produced world-shaking existences, Baigong Tianxi did not believe that the other five great Divine King clans did not have any trump cards. Let's not talk about anything else. There will definitely be world-shaking existences in the most mysterious lineage of the Supreme Emperor. At this moment, Baigong Tianxi thought of the Supreme Emperor clan. This was a terrifying power that had once produced a great Divine King, a great Celestial Emperor. Before he could continue thinking, Vice Principal Huang's lecture had already ended. The schedule of the competition is on your Sky Network. Take a look at it yourselves. I will say one last thing. This time, I will allow you to fail. However, you must not give up so easily. You must not let anyone look down on the Federal University. All of you set off. Lu Feng nodded slightly as he looked at the schedule of the competition. As participants of the Federal University, they did not have any preliminaries. Regardless of whether it was the second-year telekinesis competition or the pinnacle competition, he would only appear in the finals. The number of people in the finals would be 256. Lu Feng was bored to death as he looked at the nearly 100,000 participants. He knew that it would take a lot of time to decide on 106 people out of 100,000. Let alone in the morning, he might not even be able to complete it the next day. Of course, this was just Lu Feng's guess. Now that he was bored, Lu Feng asked Mu Shuyan to walk back and forth with him. At the same time, he wanted to see if there were any other hidden existences besides the monster he had seen before. For the whole morning, Lu Feng spent his time wandering around. Although the participants of these competitions were the top geniuses of various planets and galaxies, Lu Feng was already used to the atmosphere of the foreign battlefield. Thus, he wasn't interested in these people. These people didn't have any background, so their cultivation methods were very ordinary. Lu Feng couldn't learn anything useful from them, so this half a day's time was completely wasted by Lu Feng. Lu Feng, the competition is progressing very quickly this time. I didn't expect so many matches to be completed in one morning. It seems like the finals should start in the afternoon. Upon hearing Mu Shuyan's words, Lu Feng nodded gently. Although 100,000 people seemed like a lot, if they were eliminated separately, as long as the battles were quick enough, they could end very quickly. In the morning, at least 30 people had entered the finals. Lu Feng believed that the finals would start in the afternoon. Lu Feng didn't eat anything at noon, as he had been called by Baigong Tianxi. Baigong Tianxi muttered to himself as he looked at Lu Feng, who was still quiet. After a while, he finally said slowly, "Young Master Lu, the Huang family's young master, the Huang Emperor, appeared this time. I've already heard some things about him. His true cultivation is still at second-level demigod, but he is already at the peak of second-level demigod. Legend has it that not long ago, he fought against a god who was at the peak. In the end, he won." Lu Feng nodded gently, but there wasn't much difference in his eyes. A peak god was nothing to Lu Feng. As long as he unleashed his full combat power, he would be invincible among the gods. This invincibility was a terrifying power that could easily suppress any peak god. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't care if the Huang Emperor was really invincible among the gods. What he cared about was whether this person could give him the most insane combat power. After reaching his current position and experiencing so many battles, Lu Feng only remembered 3 battles. The first was the battle against the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao. The second battle was the shocking battle against the Demon King's clone. The third battle was the strongest battle against the Master of 6 Dao's will a few months ago. Only these 3 battles could truly make him remember. The others were not worth mentioning at all. Lu Feng really hoped that there would be a 4th battle like this. A 4th battle would allow him to completely burn himself and face an opponent with everything he had. Young Master Beigong, don't worry. No matter who it is, no matter how strong they are, we will only know after we fight. I will never give up. This is my true essence. This time, it will be the same. Hearing Lu Feng's words, Beigong Tianxi nodded gently. However, there was still a trace of worry in his eyes. Although he had heard many rumors about Lu Feng, they were still rumors. He had never seen it with his own eyes. He was really afraid that Lu Feng would fail. In the afternoon, the final list was quickly decided. It wasn't even 3 o'clock yet, and the final list was decided. Such a situation was really rare. Generally, there were only 2 situations where such a scene would occur. The first was that there were too few contestants. However, no one would believe such a situation. 100,000 contestants, this was the first time in the history of the competition. Then, there was only the second situation. The difference in strength between the contestants was very obvious. The most outstanding geniuses could face everything head-on and kill everything without stopping. In the end, they could directly rush to the final stage. Without a doubt, this was the second situation. The contestants this time are very powerful. Not only were there geniuses from the 3 academies, but there were also many shocking geniuses among the ordinary students. That Qi Liang is a very clear example. Beigong Tianxi sighed as he stood beside Lu Feng. In the eyes of these aristocratic families, the students of the academy were nothing. Even the students of the 3 big academies were nothing. Perhaps the Federal University could produce those extremely terrifying psychic masters, but the most tyrannical existence in the martial arts world would always come from these aristocratic families. This was something that they had always firmly believed without a doubt. But now it was different. It was completely different. Beigong Tianxi couldn't help but sigh at the fact that there was such a terrifying genius among the commoners that they looked down on. That's right. We can't underestimate those geniuses and monsters that came out of the commoners. Although they didn't have a huge amount of resources and protection. However, after experiencing countless hardships, it was easier for them to reach the peak. This is something that the children of aristocratic families can't have. Beigong Tianxi nodded his head lightly. He knew that Lu Feng was right. Although the children of aristocratic families had countless protection and a huge amount of resources, they were still lacking. However, these things were only of great help in the early stages. Once a martial artist reached the final realm and tried to break through those supreme barriers, these things would become a burden instead. It was also because of these reasons that the younger generation of those aristocratic families would be sent out by their families to participate in all kinds of experiential training. By doing so, they would truly experience the test of life and death, and would be a little smoother in the later stages. In the past, the human king, the ancestor of the Lu family, was an invincible existence among the ordinary people. When he was young, he was even hunted down by hundreds of millions of races. He relied on those endless tempering to walk step by step to the supreme peak and become the true first king of the endless eras and epochs. Apart from the human king, more than half of the 15 divine king powerhouses of the human race were like this. Strictly speaking, it is easier for a divine king to appear among the ordinary people. Lu Feng nodded his head lightly. The possibility of a heaven-defying genius appearing among the ordinary people was very low. However, once one was born, it would truly shock the world. Perhaps they wouldn't be that obvious in the early stages, but once they reached a certain level, the terror of these geniuses would truly manifest. Young Master Lu, your eyesight is really amazing. You actually recognized Qi Liang as an apex genius at a glance. Beigong Tianci had a vague impression of this Qi Liang. Of course, if he hadn't passed Lu Feng at the last moment and heard Lu Feng's strange words, he probably wouldn't have remembered him at all. After all, Qi Liang was really a little too inconspicuous. When he heard this, Lu Feng smiled gently and shook his head slowly. Apex genius? Haha, you are still mistaken. Do you think I would care so much if he was just a genius? Lu Feng's words stunned Beigong Tianci. However, his expression changed in the blink of an eye. Could he have been hiding his strength? There was no point in hiding it at this point. After all, everything was about to be revealed. It was better to let Beigong Tianci know everything now, so that he wouldn't be embarrassed when the time came. Not only did he hide his strength, but he also hid his level. This Qi Liang is definitely a shocking existence. If this era wasn't the era of the War of the Kings, if not for the revival of so many geniuses, then he might be the 16th king of the human race. Beigong Tianci took a deep breath. The 16th king of the human race. If this had been said by someone else, they would have been laughed at endlessly. After all, a king was a supreme being of the universe, the peerless divine king. The human race had gone through endless years and given birth to so many heaven-defying geniuses. However, there were very few who had truly reached the supreme level of the universe. There were only a few of them. It was simply ridiculous that a random person would be crowned a king. However, these words had been said by Lu Feng. This person who was said to be the first in the history of the War of the Kings would definitely become the divine king. The future must have been said by the peerless genius of the universe. He had no choice but to believe this. Could this Qi Liang also be a genius of the era? This was the only possibility that Beigong Tianci could think of. Lu Feng still shook his head gently, but then he nodded slightly. The current him isn't one yet. However, the future can't be guaranteed. After all, a 6th-level king path domain genius like him was born with a terrifying providence. Their strength is unimaginable. This is the era of the War of the Kings. The era of the War of the Kings can itself make those geniuses' providence even more heaven-defying. Now, he is already a peak king path domain genius. Give him an opportunity, and becoming a genius of the era won't be a problem at all. Beigong Tianci looked at Qi Liang's figure with a complicated expression. After a long time, he sighed slowly. Lu Feng's eyes were still unfocused. He continued to scan the area, but his voice had already reached Beigong Tianci's ears. Moreover, this Qi Liang is also hiding his cultivation level. Although his true cultivation level is not that of a demigod, it is definitely not at the mid-level upheaval stage. I'm afraid he is hiding at least a large level. These words really dealt a blow to Beigong Tianci. This was because his current strength was only at the peak of the perfect stage. A genius who walked out of an ordinary person not only surpassed him in terms of aptitude, but also in terms of cultivation speed. This made Beigong Tianci extremely depressed. Although he didn't look, Lu Feng could still feel Beigong Tianci's dejected expression. At this moment, he only smiled gently. Actually, you don't have to be too concerned. Aptitude and these are all innate. Moreover, this Qi Liang was able to cultivate to such a level, so there must be someone supporting him. Otherwise, no matter how heaven-defying he is, he wouldn't have been able to reach this level. After all, there has only been one person like my ancestor, the human king, since ancient times. Chapter 595. Hearing this, Beigong Tianci finally felt a little better. If Qi Liang also had a powerful backing, then things would be a little better. However, thinking about this year's inter-school tournament, Beigong Tianci sighed helplessly. When I was called here by my uncle, I was still full of confidence. I thought that this time's inter-school tournament would be a piece of cake for me. But the reality is completely different from what I imagined. This time, I'm destined to suffer a setback. If Beigong Tianxi appeared in the previous inter-school tournament, he would definitely be the final champion. This was without a doubt. After all, the previous few winners were only the young masters of the aristocratic families who were ranked around the top 20. However, this time, he was destined to only be a supporting character. He wouldn't even be able to cause much of a stir. When he first arrived, he was full of confidence. However, the appearance of the Divine King's bloodline made him lose confidence for the first time. Then, he saw Lu Feng. Lu Feng's appearance meant that he couldn't win. However, this wasn't the end. He received news from his family that young Master Nanming was about to appear. The appearance of this opponent, who was on par with him, made Beigong Tianxi extremely worried. However, before all this bad news disappeared, a teacher from the Federal University brought news of young Master Huang's appearance. The appearance of these people meant that he was destined to only be a supporting character. However, who would have thought that among those ordinary schools that he looked down on, among those schools that weren't even in the top 10,000 of the Federation, there would be an existence that he couldn't match up to? After receiving this series of setbacks, Beigong Tianxi felt really helpless. After the last round ended at 3 p.m., there was a 1-hour break to rearrange the order of the battles. And from 4 o'clock onwards, the finals would officially begin. The final Pinnacle Grand Competition would only be held after everything had been completed. Therefore, even though he was participating in 3 events, Lu Feng wasn't worried that he would miss out on anything. At 4 p.m., it was time for him to go on stage. Finally, an hour passed quickly. The battle list finally appeared in Lu Feng's Sky Network. Looking at his opponent, Lu Feng lightly smiled with a strange expression. His first opponent turned out to be someone from the government university, one of the 3 major universities. Of course, Lu Feng didn't care who his opponent was. After receiving the notification from Tian Luo, Lu Feng quickly rushed to the arena that he wanted to go to. Unlike the preliminaries, the finals were open to everyone. Of course, they couldn't be broadcasted. Therefore, if they wanted to see the battle, they had to be there in person. In the Federation, martial arts was the norm. Basically, there would be tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of spectators gathered outside the arena for the finals. If Capital University wasn't big enough, it probably wouldn't be able to accommodate so many people. Perhaps it was because of this that the inter-school tournament had always been held in the 3 great academies. Around Lu Feng's stage, there were about 100,000 spectators. This was neither a lot nor a little. What really mattered was the confrontation between the 3rd-year and 4th-year psychic masters and martial artists. After all, those existences were much stronger than the 1st-year and 2nd-year psychic masters. The degree of excitement during the battles was also much higher. Therefore, many people went to the side of those arenas to watch. The people around Lu Feng, such as Su Wenchao and Qi Yunqing, were all competing. Therefore, they couldn't come to cheer for Lu Feng. Lulu and He Lufei, on the other hand, were very loyal and ran over to cheer for Kong Ting. Therefore, at this moment, Lu Feng was completely alone. Of course, it was normal for these people not to come. After all, they knew that Lu Feng didn't need to cheer at all. If Lu Feng were to fail, then that would be truly shocking news. Step by step, Lu Feng walked to the arena. He quietly looked at the opponent in front of him, the genius psychic master from Capital University. After the 2 of them were in position, the referee from Capital University finally arrived. After walking up to the stage and quietly looking at the 2 of them, he finally announced the start of the match. The moment he finished speaking, Lu Feng's opponent had already started to prepare and use the psychic cultivation method. Lu Feng quietly looked at his opponent, but didn't make the slightest move. It seemed like he didn't care at all. Of course, Lu Feng really didn't care. This was because his opponent, the genius psychic master from Government University, was only an intermediate great psychic master. An intermediate great psychic master was nothing. Even Zhongling, who was a king psychic, couldn't bear the pressure of Lu Feng's majestic aura. Naturally, Lu Feng didn't care too much about such an opponent. However, just because he didn't care didn't mean that his opponent didn't care. Seeing that Lu Feng was arrogant and unprepared, the genius psychic master from Government University flashed a trace of joy in his eyes. In fact, in a battle between psychic masters, the hierarchy wasn't that obvious. What really mattered between psychic masters was aptitude. If one's aptitude was terrifying, they would be able to use psychic techniques very quickly. Once the psychic technique was completed first, the psychic master would have the absolute advantage. Therefore, although he thought that Lu Feng's strength surpassed his own, when he saw that Lu Feng was so arrogant, the genius psychic master from Government University was still very excited. Vaguely, he seemed to see the scene of Lu Feng being completely defeated by his powerful psychic skills. The moment the cultivation method took shape, the smug smile at the corner of his mouth could no longer be concealed. The genius psychic master from Government University also knew that with his cultivation level, he definitely wouldn't be able to reach the end. In fact, he would be at the bottom of the list. Being able to win a match was a kind of victory. At this moment, this victory was right in front of him. Is this Federal University student an idiot? He's already prepared. Why hasn't he made his move yet? Sigh, this is the result of being careless. I've seen a lot of people like him, but they all end up falling in the end. Arrogant, presumptuous, ignorant. As a psychic master, he actually thinks that he's strong and actually allows others to use their psychic technique. Isn't he courting death? There were many people below the ring who knew what was going on, so they quickly understood what was going on. When they saw that the genius psychic master from Government University complete his psychic technique, while Lu Feng remained motionless, they seemed to have already guessed the outcome. After all, psychics were different from warriors. They didn't have strong bodies. Once they were hit, they would be finished in an instant. Therefore, they were sure that Lu Feng had lost. He had completely lost. However, as soon as the telekinesis technique took shape and headed towards Lu Feng, all the discussions disappeared in an instant. Everyone looked at the ring in shock. It was hard to describe their current feelings. When that terrifying psychic technique, which seemed to be able to destroy countless places, was about to arrive, Lu Feng only waved his arm a little. However, this simple wave of his arm had caused that terrifying psychic technique to vanish in an instant. Although such a situation had happened before, this was the first time they had seen it happen. A gentle wave of his arm had directly annihilated his opponent's killing intent. Such a strange situation could only happen under one circumstance. The difference in strength between the two sides was huge, extremely huge, extremely huge. They all knew that when the Government University's psychic technique had arrived, Lu Feng hadn't used any psychic technique. He had only used his own mind power. His mind power, which was far superior to his opponent's, had completely annihilated his opponent's psychic technique. This was a confrontation between two completely different levels. This was a completely asymmetrical confrontation. Such a situation rarely happened between teachers and students. After all, anyone who could enter this place was a genius. Geniuses were definitely not like ordinary people, who were weak and couldn't withstand a single blow. Lu Feng looked at the dazed psychic master from Government University in front of him and smiled faintly. Not bad, but this kind of strength is still a little lacking. You, go down by yourself. When he heard Lu Feng's words, the genius psychic master from Government University was silent for a moment. After a while, he actually walked down from the arena just like that. This was a scene that had never happened before. It didn't cause any shock. If it had been them, they would have done the same thing. These people knew that when facing an opponent like Lu Feng, there was no point in continuing the fight. Rather than being severely injured and thrown out of the arena in shame, it was better to save face and walk down by themselves. This way, at least he could preserve some of his face and suffer less damage. At the moment, only Lu Feng was left in the arena. The judge from Capital University looked at Lu Feng quietly before finally announcing, "Federal University student Lu Feng has advanced." After saying this, the judge had already left. Lu Feng slowly walked down from the arena and disappeared. There was no doubt that the speed at which Lu Feng defeated his opponent was considered fast in the finals. However, the shock that he brought to people was incomparable to that of other competitions. After all, Capital University was already the place where the young geniuses gathered. The martial artists they represented might not be at the pinnacle, but in terms of psyche masters, they were already at the pinnacle of the pinnacle. The gap between them and the Federal University wasn't that obvious, and the pinnacle of psyche masters were all gathered in the three big schools. However, in this clash of the ultimate psychic masters, there was a shocking gap that would only occasionally appear in the path of warriors. It was a shocking scene that would only appear when the young masters of those monstrous families fought against ordinary students. The shock brought about by this was undoubtedly very impactful. Countless people were still discussing until Lu Feng left. They were all guessing what level this Federal University psychic called Lu Feng had reached. Chapter 596. After leaving the arena, the first place that Lu Feng went to was the place where Kong Ting was participating in the competition. Among these people, Lu Feng knew that Kong Ting should be the most dangerous, and the most difficult to go on, although she was not bad. But if she wanted to pass the first round, it would be somewhat difficult. Moreover, Lulu was also there. Except for Kong Ting, the others did not have much difficulty passing the first round. Therefore, Lu Feng chose the area where Kong Ting was. When Lu Fenglai arrived at Kong Ting's arena, he found that there was already a sea of people here. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng could only helplessly smile. It seems that beautiful women are popular everywhere. After talking to himself, Lu Feng forced his way in. Without a doubt, Kong Ting was a beautiful and strong girl. She was the most popular. Therefore, the number of people who came here to watch the competition was far more than the number of people at his place. With so many people wanting to find Lulu's location, it was undoubtedly very difficult. This time, Lu Feng did not hide, and directly used his spiritual consciousness. After a moment, Lu Feng smiled slightly. He had already sensed Lulu's location. Quietly walking over, at this moment, Lu Feng used the profound mystery. Everyone around him automatically moved aside, allowing him to easily appear beside Lulu. At this moment, there were not many people around Lulu and He Lufei. This was probably the privilege of beautiful women. Every man unconsciously wanted to protect them, and not let them suffer any harm. Looking at the two beauties screaming at the top of their lungs, Lu Feng chuckled. When he just arrived, he had already paid attention. Although Kong Ting's opponent was very strong, but in Lu Feng's estimation, Kong Ting should be able to defeat her opponent in the end. Coming to Lulu's side, he gently reached out his hand and patted Lulu's head. At this moment, Lulu's body slightly stiffened. With a kind of angry look, she turned around. But when she saw that it was Lu Feng, this kind of expression instantly disappeared. "Cousin, you came." Lu Feng smiled and nodded. "I'll come over as soon as I'm done." Lulu also nodded gently, but then she seemed to think of something, and a touch of excitement appeared on her face. "So cousin, you've already advanced?" As he spoke, he could not hide the excitement on his face. Looking at Lulu's somewhat crazy appearance, Lu Feng helplessly smiled and nodded. At this time, He Lufei also noticed Lu Feng's arrival. When she heard the conversation between Lulu and Lu Feng, she could only smile helplessly. "Lulu, what kind of person is cousin Lu Feng? How could he fail? Don't you think your happiness is a little too strange?" Hearing this, Lulu's face turned slightly red. She had been too happy just now and had forgotten the real situation. Lu Feng's existence was definitely not something these people could compare to. If they really had to be compared, then this would only be an insult to Lu Feng. But cousin, even so, I still have to congratulate you. Lu Feng softly smiled and rubbed Lulu's hair before letting go. At this time, their eyes were focused on the stage, on Kong Ting's side. Seeing that Kong Ting seemed to be about to retreat, Lulu and Lu Fei's expression changed drastically, and a touch of anxiety appeared in their eyes. But seeing this, Lu Feng was still incomparably calm as before. He gently shook his head and said to Lulu, "Don't worry, Kong Ting is pretending to be weak. Her strength is definitely above her opponent's." Lulu had always believed in Lu Feng's words. Therefore, at this moment, she was no longer anxious and slowly calmed down. On the side, Lu Fei saw Lulu's appearance and thought of Lu Feng's existence. In the end, she also did the same. They knew that with Lu Feng's current terrifying degree of strength, it was absolutely impossible for him to casually say all kinds of nonsense. So what Lu Feng said must be the real situation. Sure enough, Kong Ting, who had just been retreating, actually directly used an incomparably powerful psychic skill after seizing the opponent's momentary mistake. In an instant, the wind and clouds changed, heaven and earth trembled slightly, and a terrifying attack was formed in an instant. Everyone knew that such a terrifying attack was definitely not something that could be done casually. It must have been accumulated over a long period of time before it could be unleashed. But when Kong Ting used it, it was completely incomparably easy. Her strength, these people saw with their own eyes. Everyone knew that Kong Ting did not hide any of her strength. She was just like that. But under such circumstances, she still managed to do such a thing. This could only prove one thing, and that was Kong Ting's wit. She had been preparing for this since a long time ago, and the mistake the other party made just now was the biggest flaw in her plan. The power that had been accumulated for a long time had been released in an instant, and finally ended this shocking battle quickly. Looking at Kong Ting's victory on the stage, everyone was slightly silent. But soon, a series of frenzied shouts disintegrated everything in an instant, startling the entire area. Although Kong Ting did not display her absolute strength, and did not have that kind of extravagant scene, her victory was completed completely with her wisdom. In addition, Kong Ting was a beautiful girl, so at this moment, almost everyone was endlessly cheering for her. Standing on the stage, Kong Ting finally revealed a smile. That was a smile that came from the depths of her heart. The first round of the finals in the afternoon quickly ended, and the second round of the competition will start in the morning of the second day, so the afternoon was completely free. In this first round of the competition, less than 50 out of 500 students from the Federal University failed, and the other 450 people all passed the examination. Overall, this result was very good. So Federal University's Vice President Huang had a satisfied smile on his face from the beginning to the end. Among the three big schools, Federal University's results were without a doubt the best. Other than Federal University's 450 people who entered the second round, Capital University had 350 people, and Government University only had 300 people. But this number was already terrifying enough. A total of 1,500 people from the three schools participated in the finals, and 1,100 people passed the first round to enter the second round. Many of these people were caused by the competition between the three big schools. If not for this reason, there would be over 1,200 people from the three big schools alone. Without a doubt, this scene was abnormally terrifying. This deeply showed the terrifying foundation and strength of the three big schools. Lu Feng spent the entire night with his family and loved ones. Just by looking at his appearance, Lu Feng did not seem like a participant at all. Beigong Tianci, who was beside Lu Feng, sighed deeply when he saw how calm Lu Feng was, as if he didn't care about anything. Young Master Lu, at this stage of the competition, those young masters who know the truth are all grasping the last bit of time, and are madly working hard. I'm afraid only you would be so carefree. Beigong Tianci had already completely given up on this battle. For an existence like him, if he could not become the strongest existence, he would rather not participate. Under the circumstances where they gave their all, they would definitely not allow themselves to become someone else's supporting role. Therefore, this time, Beigong Tianci had already given up. It was precisely because of this that he was so free at the moment. He didn't make any preparations for the next day's competition. Of course, he didn't need to make any preparations. After all, the existence of these young lords would only appear in the final competition. They wouldn't participate in any of the previous competitions. This was an unspoken agreement between the big schools. After all, if these young masters were to participate, then the inter-school competition would be changed to the inter-family competition. Hearing Beigong Tianci's words, Lu Feng smiled lightly and shook his head indifferently. This battle, no matter what, I will win. No matter who my opponent is, what kind of strength they have, or what kind of power they have behind them, I will definitely win. I will never fail. Never. It's just one night, it doesn't matter to me. That's because I'm always in peak condition. I don't need any rest or time to adjust my condition. If I want to, then I will always be at the peak. There was a strange light in his eyes. Although it was peaceful, it was filled with a domineering will that was terrifying. It was difficult to describe the fear in the depths of his heart. The night passed quickly. The next morning, Lu Feng woke up very early. This was because he had a competition very early in the morning. This time, Vice Principal Huang did not say much. He only allowed them to move freely. Everyone understood that the real test was about to begin. Although none of the students said anything, it wasn't hard to see the slight nervousness in their eyes at this moment. Looking at Mu Xuyen beside him, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment before saying, "Xuyen, you should know that victory is not that important. This glory is not that big of a deal to you. I hope that you can be happy and safe. I really don't care about anything else. Do you understand?" Seeing Lu Feng's serious expression, Mu Xuyen fell silent. After a long time, she finally nodded slowly. "I understand." Her voice was very, very soft. Seeing Mu Xuyen like this, Lu Feng could only sigh helplessly. In every inter-school competition, although there are no deaths, there are a lot of people who are hurt. I really don't want you to be hurt even a little. So, if you can't do it, just admit defeat. Don't try to be brave. You must remember. Chapter 597. After leaving his final instructions, Lu Feng left. The competition was about to begin, and Lu Feng knew that it would be useless for him to say anything more. Everything depended on Mu Xuyen's own thoughts. This morning was the competition for the advancement from 128 to 64. From this time onwards, the chances of experts clashing would increase. Basically, those who could make it to this stage were all geniuses from the specially recruited departments of the various major academies. The clashes between them were bound to be shocking. Compared to yesterday's peak, there were even tens of thousands of matches going on at the same time. There were much fewer matches going on today. There were 4 grades, and each grade had a total of 64 matches. This meant that there were a total of 256 matches. Although this was still very terrifying in the eyes of outsiders, compared to before, it was much, much less terrifying. The audience outside each venue was more than 3 times more than yesterday. After all, it was now the time for the real pinnacle showdown, and there were more and more people coming to watch. If it's the final time for the pinnacle showdown, I'm afraid the number of people in each match will be tens or even hundreds of times more than now. In the eyes of ordinary people, the pinnacle showdown represented the pinnacle of the younger generation. It was also the wind vane that symbolized the future strength of the Federation. Therefore, every time the pinnacle showdown of the academies was held, it attracted countless people to come and watch. However, The only thing that puzzled Lu Feng was that the pinnacle showdown of the academies was not broadcasted to the public. Even the Heavenly Network did not allow any information to circulate. If one wanted to see everything, they had to go to the venue personally. It was because of this reason that the pinnacle showdown of the academies gradually became the true golden age of the entire Federation as time passed. Almost every time the pinnacle showdown of the academies was held, countless people from the entire human race would crazily rush to the capital administrative planet to watch the real pinnacle showdown of the younger generation. By the time Lu Fenglai arrived at the arena, the number of spectators had already reached an astonishing 700,000. This was 7 times more than the 100,000 yesterday. According to the usual calculations and data, Lu Feng should have around 300,000 spectators. However, the number of people who appeared at this moment exceeded Lu Feng's expectations by more than twice. This really confused Lu Feng. Finally, as Lu Feng walked up to the ring, there was a burst of discussion below. That's him. This is the terrifying existence I was talking about. That's right, it's him. This is definitely not the strength of the younger generation. I'm afraid that he is the ultimate hidden trump card of the Federal University. Observe carefully. In the future, he will definitely leave his name behind. Hearing these voices, Lu Feng came to a realization. It must be because he was too strong yesterday that these people were attracted. With a helpless smile, Lu Feng didn't care whether he continued to hide or not. Moreover, he had never been able to conceal himself. Moreover, once he started fighting, once he encountered the likes of the desolate Emperor, he would definitely unleash his combat strength. At that time, everything would appear. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't deliberately pretend. Lu Feng walked up to the ring slowly. Looking at his opponent, the psychic master from an ordinary school, Lu Feng revealed a faint smile. Opposite him, the psychic master was different from Lu Feng. His face was ashen. Apart from Lu Feng, the others would study their opponents before going up to the ring. Obviously, Lu Feng's opponent knew about Lu Feng's strength. Therefore, at this moment, he was really a little sad. I know that your strength is incomparably terrifying. This time, I'm afraid that you are also aiming for the final summit competition. In terms of strength, I'm definitely not your opponent. However, I don't want to give up so easily. A battle. Give me a chance to fight. Let me see how strong your strength is. As he spoke, countless surges of power began to condense in front of Lu Feng's opponent. These were the words that came from the bottom of his heart. In the past, Lu Feng might have left something behind to give him a chance. However, at his current level, strength was the only thing that mattered. It wasn't that Lu Feng had become cold and heartless. Instead, as his strength increased, his state of mind was also constantly transforming. As he looked at his opponent, Lu Feng sighed softly. Strength is the only thing that matters in this world. Perhaps you want to show something, but your strength isn't enough. Then, even if you want to show off something, it will all be in vain. However, your character reminds me of the past. Therefore, I will give you a chance. Whether you can grasp it or not will depend on yourself. The moment he finished speaking, Lu Feng waved his arm gently again. At this moment, a terrifying majesty appeared in the void. This was a kind of concentrated, extreme mind power. Once it was released, it would raise everything to the ground. Lu Feng was the one who had released this mind power. However, the mind power he released didn't scatter all over the sky. Instead, it was all condensed in the arena. Using a terrifying power and condensing an unparalleled power seemed to be able to move the wind and clouds. In the eyes of ordinary people, Lu Feng's opponent was like an immortal who could summon the wind and rain and change everything. Such a scene was very gorgeous, glorious, and magnificent. Unfortunately, he was facing Lu Feng, who was more than one level stronger than him. Lu Feng was an emperor. With just a gentle wave of his arm, everything disappeared in an instant. Everything was completely annihilated, leaving no trace behind. This opponent was different from the previous one. This opponent had already reached the peak of the advanced level of a great telekinesis master. It seemed like he was only a little bit away from becoming a great telekinesis master. However, when facing Lu Feng with such strength, none of them had the slightest ability to fight back. Compared to the previous time when Lu Feng was as calm as the wind and clouds, the strength that Lu Feng displayed this time around was simply too frightening. When he had first displayed his strength, some people had suspected that Lu Feng had used some kind of weapon or used some kind of special technique to annihilate his opponent's killing power. But this time, when he fully unleashed his power, no one could doubt him anymore. No one could doubt him anymore. With such power, let alone a psychic grandmaster, even a psychic master would not have any power to fight back. They would be completely crushed into nothingness. This was invincible strength. Among the younger generation of telekinesis masters, he was almost invincible. Lu Feng looked at the pale-faced telekinesis master, but he didn't show any mercy. The terrifying power continued to bloom, as if it really wanted to crush him into pieces. Seeing this scene, countless people were abnormally frightened. They looked at Lu Feng, not understanding why Lu Feng was still going overboard even though he had already won. He still continued to attack without stopping. However, in this terrifying atmosphere, the young telekinesis master still didn't say anything. There was only a kind of persistence in his eyes, a kind of indifference. He came here with the glory and hope of the academy. He couldn't simply leave this place like this. Therefore, he had to work hard. Even if he knew that he couldn't win, he absolutely couldn't give up. He could never give up. I won't fail so easily. A shocking roar came from the young man's mouth. The next moment, endless turbulence appeared, and a shocking power flashed in an instant. It actually broke through Lu Feng's endless mental power blockade in an instant. Killing Zone. The telekinesis master's killing zone was the most powerful killing technique that the young man had poured all his effort into. At the same time, it was also a supreme technique that belonged to him. Finally, at this final moment, he still used it. He used it completely, and it bloomed with an unparalleled and brilliant brilliance. The impact of that moment made everyone sluggish, and shock appeared in everyone's eyes. This wasn't just a kind of visual shock, but also a kind of spiritual shock. People sympathized with the weak. There was no doubt that the young man was a weakling in front of Lu Feng. A weakling who was in a complete mess. However, he was working hard to create a miracle, and he was working hard to kill his way into the world. Everyone hoped to be able to make a shocking reversal, even when the gap was so big that it couldn't be described. However, these were all illusions, and they were all just their imaginations. Lu Feng's strength was no longer something that could be reversed by any kind of madness or limit. Lu Feng himself was an existence that could reverse the king's path. He had always reversed countless powerful existences and climbed to his current peak state step by step. How could he be reversed by others? It was just as Lu Feng had once said. When one was at the peak of one's strength, any reversal would be a joke. Lu Feng stretched out his arm and gently grabbed the terrifying killing zone with his own arm. At this moment, all doubts disappeared. All dissatisfaction and disdain were annihilated. Nobody could say anything to Lu Feng anymore. The strength that Lu Feng had displayed could no longer be described as terrifying. This was simply not a confrontation of the same level. This was simply not a confrontation of the same generation. Lu Feng's current strength wasn't any worse than the geniuses of the previous generation, or even the ordinary monstrous figures. These geniuses, who were struggling among their peers, naturally couldn't go against Lu Feng. Finally, after all the killing intent was completely annihilated, Lu Feng's eyes became brighter and brighter. However, his mind power actually started to release a powerful output once again. In an instant, The young telekinesis master felt as if his body was about to collapse and be completely annihilated. However, his eyes were still unyielding and stubborn. Many of the spectators' eyes were slightly moist. This kind of persistence had already touched the weakest spot in their hearts. Finally, someone started to shout for Lu Feng to stop. In their eyes, Lu Feng was completely crushing his opponent. Lu Feng had already won. There was no suspense at all. However, he was still crushing his opponent crazily. In the eyes of many people, this was an extremely perverted hobby. Stop. You have already won. What else do you want? Killing is not allowed here. Are you trying to violate the rules? Let go, young man. Your opponent shouldn't be him. Trash. Don't tell me that the Federal University only produces trash like you. The last sentence made Lu Feng's indifferent eyes change slightly. At this moment, the terrifying might was no longer limited to that narrow space. It actually started to wantonly spread outwards. Panic, absolute panic. The 700,000 people present could clearly feel Lu Feng's unparalleled majesty. This was a kind of complete suppression. No matter what existence there was, under the suppression of Lu Feng's peak might, they couldn't even make the slightest movement. No one spoke, because they couldn't open their mouths or say anything. Lu Feng looked at the young man who was half kneeling on the ground in front of him. A faint smile hung at the corner of his mouth. I said that I would give you a chance. Now the opportunity is right in front of you. Whether you can transform or not depends on yourself. When had Lu Feng's transformations not been a million times more difficult than this? He had truly walked on the edge of life and death, lingering in the abyss of depravity. Therefore, his transformations were so shocking and so unexplainable. Now, he saw the persistence in the young telekinesis master's eyes, which even carried a faint trace of madness. This kind of expression made Lu Feng reminisce. Therefore, he was willing to give him a chance. After hearing Lu Feng's words, a strange look appeared in the young man's eyes. However, in the next moment, any expression disappeared. It was completely replaced by an even more berserk willpower. After using the supreme technique, his soul and body had suffered endless damage. At this moment, under Lu Feng's might, the young man was almost crushed. However, he was still persevering and working hard. Faintly, a vague aura appeared around the young man's body. It was a new feeling, as if the young man would enter a new realm at any time. Many people finally understood. They finally understood what Lu Feng's previous words meant, and why Lu Feng was doing this. At this moment, their eyes no longer held the same hatred as before when they looked at Lu Feng. There was only an incomparably complicated look in their eyes, as if they hadn't expected things to develop like this. Chapter 598. He's breaking through? He's breaking through. He's really breaking through. He's breaking through under this endless pressure. Genius. This is a real genius. The imposing aura that had been exerting on the 700,000 people around him had disappeared. At the moment, Lu Feng had put all his attention on the young man. His heart had been completely focused on the young man in front of him. Sensing his state, Lu Feng's smile became even more obvious. At this moment, more and more people understood. They finally knew what Lu Feng was trying to do. It turns out that we misunderstood. It was complicated. It was extremely complicated. At this point in time, how could they not know? They all understood why Lu Feng was doing this. This was not because Lu Feng had any evil fetishes, nor was he deliberately making things difficult for the young man. He was helping his opponent. At this moment, many people thought of what Lu Feng had said before. He had said that he would give the young man a chance. And now, this was the so-called opportunity. Finally, the final breakthrough had come. A brand new willpower came from the young Psyche Master's body. His body, which had been severely injured because of Lu Feng, had finally recovered completely at this moment. He had once again returned to his former peak state. A brand new realm. This was a brand new realm. He had finally saved a lot of time and entered the peak of the realm of a great Psyche Master. At this moment, the young man, who was standing in the ring again, looked at Lu Feng with a grateful expression in his eyes. The terrifying imposing aura had completely disappeared the moment he broke through. The young Psyche Master had also understood what Lu Feng meant when he said he would give him a chance. It turned out that he really wanted to help him break through. He looked at Lu Feng and in the end, he bowed deeply. This time I lost. I lost without any reason or excuse. Thank you for your help, Guyulan. I will never forget it. Helping someone break through was undoubtedly a huge favor. It was a favor worth remembering for the rest of one's life. When he heard this, Lu Feng just smiled gently. He turned around and walked towards the ring. Just as Lu Feng was about to leave the ring, his voice was suddenly heard. This is an era that belongs to the younger generation. Do your best. I helped you not because I wanted you to remember me, but because I hoped that you could protect the human race. I remember. Although the edge of life and death is filled with countless dangers, it's easier to break through it. However, in the midst of life and death, it is much easier to break through. Life and death and sinking into oblivion are the places where geniuses like you and me should train. Lu Feng's silhouette had completely disappeared. Gu Yulan was silent as he watched Lu Feng's back. However, a moment later, he revealed a strange smile. I remember the human race. I will protect the human race. As long as I am still alive, I will protect the human race forever. However, you created such a shocking miracle at such a young age. How much suffering and pain must you have gone through? Lu Fenglai had advanced easily in the second round. He had even helped someone else break through. There was no doubt that he felt very good about this. After all, Gu Yulan was just like him. They both had a spirit of never giving up. Lu Feng had seen so many monstrous geniuses and geniuses. However, there were far too few existences on par with him. Now that he had finally seen one, Lu Feng had to help him, no matter what. I hope that in the future, you can really become a powerful existence that can protect the human race. Lu Fenglai arrived at the venue where Mu Xueyan was competing. Lu Feng smiled as he watched Mu Xueyan's figure, which was surrounded by countless mysterious powers. With just a glance, he could already confirm that Mu Xueyan was definitely going to win this match. After not seeing her for more than a year, Lu Feng felt that Mu Xueyan had changed a lot. In the past, her combat skills weren't bad. However, compared to those geniuses of the same level, there was still a big gap. However, at this moment, her combat skills were absolutely terrifying. She was almost at the top of her peers. Lu Feng naturally understood that for Mu Xueyan to be able to complete such a shocking transformation in such a short period of time, she had to put in a terrifying amount of effort. There was a faint trace of pity in his eyes. At this moment, Lu Feng could only sigh softly. He put away all his previous emotions and put on a happy expression again. Lu Feng knew that since Mu Xueyan didn't want to talk about these things, he shouldn't ask. In the arena, the battle had already reached its climax. In the eyes of many people, such a battle was already hard to determine the winner. However, in Lu Feng's eyes, the outcome had already been decided. Mu Xueyan's own level might not have any advantage over her opponent. After all, both of them were at the peak of the Psyche Master realm. However, Mu Xueyan's combat skills and understanding of Psyche Master's combat skills were incomparable to her opponent's. The seemingly fierce battle was actually deliberately created by Mu Xueyan. Basically, the form and direction of all the battles were completely according to the script that she had drawn up. Finally, after a fierce collision, Lu Feng's smile became even brighter. Lu Feng understood that the battle was about to end. Sure enough, In the next moment, Mu Shuiyan suddenly struck out with a killing power that stirred up the wind and clouds. It caused the space to vibrate, causing the entire arena to shake continuously. It was this sudden killing power that caused her opponent to stagnate for a moment. In a battle between experts, a moment of mistake couldn't be tolerated. Naturally, this moment allowed Mu Shuiyan to find an opportunity. This time, there was no terrifying psyche master cultivation method. Mu Shuiyan only used a kind of cultivation method that was almost instantaneous to complete everything, directly defeating her opponent completely. This victory was exactly the same as Kong Ting's previous victory. However, one relied on the wisdom of battle, while the other relied on the understanding of battle to complete it. It was a pity that Mu Shuiyan's victory didn't receive many cheers, because her opponent was a student from Capital University. If it weren't for the fact that Mu Shuiyan was a beauty, they would have already started to say dirty things. Therefore, although she had won, no one cheered for her. However, Mu Shuiyan was obviously very calm about all this around her. Her expression didn't have the slightest fluctuation, and she was as calm as when she was fighting. However, when she saw Lu Feng coming to the side of the arena to welcome her, all the coldness quietly disappeared. Lu Feng, I won. These simple words made Lu Feng's heart tremble slightly. Lu Feng, I won. I didn't become a burden to you. I still won. Lu Feng smiled. It was a strange and complicated smile. Lu Feng reached out and gently pulled Mu Shuiyan into his arms. There was an extremely complicated expression on his face. Congratulations, Princess Shuiyan. Congratulations, you won. Mu Shuiyan's body trembled slightly. She could clearly hear the strange and complicated feelings in Lu Feng's words. Finally, Mu Shuiyan propped herself up from Lu Feng's arms. Lu Feng, I don't really care about winning. I just don't want to be left far behind by you. That's all. Looking at Mu Shuiyan's serious expression, Lu Feng could only sigh deeply. He looked seriously at Mu Shuiyan and finally said, Shuiyan, you should understand. In my eyes, your existence and your safety are countless times more important than anything else. I will never leave you far behind. Not today, not ever. What I want is for you to be safe and sound. Mu Shuiyan looked quietly at Lu Feng, and Lu Feng looked seriously at Mu Shuiyan. In an instant, both of them smiled. They both understood each other's true thoughts. I understand. This time, Lu Feng understood, and Mu Shuiyan really understood. A silent emotion spread faintly between the two of them. After a long time, Lu Feng finally said, All right, let's go take a look at Wen Chao. He should be done soon. Hearing this, Mu Shuiyan nodded slightly. She held Lu Feng's arm and was about to leave. However, just as they took the first step, Su Wenchao's voice suddenly sounded in their ears. I knew that you two would definitely think of me after being affectionate for a while. It's a pity that I came to see you as soon as the battle ended. In the end, sigh. Su Wenchao's words made Mu Shuiyan and Lu Feng smile. It was a kind of happy smile. Both of them knew that they absolutely could not respond to Su Wenchao's words. Otherwise, he would definitely use it as an excuse to make a fuss. They all knew Su Wenchao's character. Being wretched was Su Wenchao's theme. Using it as an excuse to make a fuss was one of his characteristics. Just by looking at this, Su Wenchao really did not look like the young master of an aristocratic family. He looked more like an ordinary student. Therefore, whether it was Lu Feng or Mu Shuiyan, they decisively did not speak to Su Wenchao. They did not even look at him. The two of them hesitated slightly. After thinking for a moment, Lu Feng finally said, I wonder how Yunqing is doing. Let's go see him. When they heard that they were going to see Qi Yunqing, neither of them objected. They knew that a battle between martial artists was different from a psychic master's. It would not be over in a short period of time. Therefore, if they rushed over now, as long as the difference in strength was not too great, it should not be over yet. Of course, these were all excuses. They knew that with Qi Yunqing's current power, It was impossible for him to find an opponent among his peers in these academies. Therefore, it was impossible for Qi Yunqing to fail. However, since they had already decided, they still left. Just like that, the three of them turned around and walked towards the arena where Qi Yunqing was. Chapter 599. The current Qi Yunqing had already become a true monster under the imperceptible influence of the heavenly wood. Furthermore, his current cultivation base had already reached the middle stage upheaval stage. Given Qi Yunqing's aptitude and current cultivation base, it would be easy for him to face off against a peak-perfect stage opponent. Of course, this only applied to those with ordinary aptitude. After all, peak geniuses at the Federation level could also challenge someone who was 3 levels above them. There was no doubt that there were very few people among the younger generation who could reach this level. Although it was not impossible, it was still unlikely for a second-year student to do so. The young masters who came here are all aiming for the final apex competition. They won't appear in other competitions. This is also an unwritten rule. Given Qi Yunqing's current strength, even if he participates in the final apex competition, I'm afraid that he will still be able to get a certain ranking. If he entered the final apex competition, although he couldn't be compared to the young masters who were at the great success stage, it was still very possible for him to get a lower ranking. Therefore, a mere second-year warrior competition simply couldn't stop Qi Yunqing's progress. Sure enough, when they arrived at the side of the ring, the competition had already entered the final stage. Qi Yunqing's opponent was a mid-level upheaval stage martialist with the same cultivation base as Qi Yunqing. Unfortunately, he wasn't even a nebula-level genius. Naturally, such an opponent was nothing to Qi Yunqing. It was unknown whether Qi Yunqing was hiding his trump card or not, but he didn't defeat him in an instant. Instead, after fighting for such a long time and seeing that his opponent had no more strength to fight, he finally made his move and ended this long battle. After the referee announced the result, Qi Yunqing walked down from the ring. At the moment, the head teacher of the second-year warrior special recruitment class was already standing beside him. As the head teacher, he definitely knew about his students' aptitude. He knew that whether they could achieve the final victory of the second-year warrior competition this time would depend on Qi Yunqing. Upon seeing Qi Yunqing come to his side, the head teacher smiled slightly and nodded at him. Qi Yunqing, on the other hand, respectfully greeted his teacher. However, before he could say anything, a few more figures appeared beside him. "You're here." Seeing Lu Feng and the other two appear, Qi Yunqing smiled from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, all 3 of them were smiling faintly. "Not bad, Yunqing. Judging from your appearance, you should be the final champion this time." Qi Yunqing didn't deny it. He just smiled confidently. Indeed, Lu Feng belonged to the psychic competition. No one had any conflict with him. If Lu Feng were to participate in the warrior competition, then Qi Yunqing wouldn't be so confident. "Let's have lunch together." There was still a competition in the afternoon. After the competition, they could go out and have some fun at night. "I heard there are a lot of good places in capital." Looking at Su Wenchao's wretched gaze, they seemed to have thought of something and sent him a look of disdain. Su Wenchao had long been immune to such gazes. Naturally, he didn't care about anything. He just chuckled there. "Okay, let's talk about it at night. In the afternoon, it will be the battle to enter the top 32. No one can be careless. You must be careful." They understood that Lu Feng was talking to Mu Xuan. After all, except for her, there was no problem with the others. After leaving the warrior competition venue, they went to Kong Ting's place. Unsurprisingly, Kong Ting failed. She was lucky enough to make it to the second round. From the second round onwards, everyone was a true powerhouse. So, it was impossible for her to make it to the third round just by relying on luck. Obviously, Kong Ting knew this. Although she was a little depressed, she didn't lose much. This was enough. With Lulu and He Lufei comforting her by her side, Kong Ting quickly recovered from her disappointment. Noon passed very quickly. In the afternoon, they didn't go far. This was because the battles to enter the top 32 were coming out this afternoon. The students who could enter the top 32 were undoubtedly geniuses among geniuses. The top 32 of the psychic branch basically represented the peak of the current era and even the current universe. Therefore, the competition between psychic masters was obviously more meaningful and interesting than that between martial artists. That afternoon, the number of people who came to watch Lu Feng's competition reached an astonishing 2 million. Compared to the surrounding arenas, the number of people around Lu Feng was already very terrifying. Although it couldn't be compared to the top few battles. But on the whole, it was already very big. Looking at the audience around him, Lu Feng was still the same as before. Below the arena, countless people were talking about it. However, most of these people were amazed and praised Lu Feng. After all, Lu Feng had helped others break through during the last battle, which had earned everyone's admiration. In addition, the strength that Lu Feng had displayed in the previous round was also extremely frightening. It had shattered all the rumors and doubts, and made people understand that Lu Feng's existence was truly unparalleled in the world. Finally, the battle began. This time, Lu Feng's opponent was a true pinnacle psychic master. This was a pinnacle psychic master from the government university. His combat skills were extremely strong, and he was considered a terrifying powerhouse among the same level. Looking at the opponent in front of him, Lu Feng could only smile helplessly. Sometimes, if it weren't for the fact that the drawing of lots was completely fair, he would even suspect that it was deliberately arranged by the capital university. Up until now, he had encountered 3 opponents. One of them was from other small colleges, and the other 2 were from the government university. Up until now, Lu Feng had not encountered a student from the capital university among so many students from the other 3 colleges. The battle started very quickly, and it also ended very quickly. It was almost completely over in the blink of an eye. This time, Lu Feng didn't waste any time, because his heart was on Mu Shuyan. Lu Feng also wanted to quickly end the battle and see Mu Shuyan. It was easy, extremely easy. He just raised his arm and used the worst Xian Thunder to end everything. Even though his opponent had rich combat skills, under Lu Feng's most powerful attack, he still didn't have any room to display his skills. He was defeated in an instant. Lu Feng became the first student to enter the top 32. The commotion this time couldn't be compared to before. After all, this was a battle to enter the top 32. Such a battle was quite valuable. However, in such a battle, Lu Feng was still very straightforward. This was even the first time Lu Feng used a psychic master's cultivation method. Of course, in the eyes of many people, Lu Feng used a psychic master's cultivation method. After all, they couldn't come into contact with the existence of supreme immortal methods. Looking at Lu Feng's disappearing figure, many people were silent and sighed. Those who were aware of the strength of psychic masters knew that just by using the move just now, Lu Feng was probably enough to defeat an advanced psychic master in an instant. In other words, if one's strength wasn't at the peak of a psychic master's, they wouldn't even be able to withstand one move from Lu Feng. What a terrifying psychic master student! He is definitely a monster, definitely a monster. I'm sure of this without a doubt. Other than a monster, there can't be any other existence that can enter such a realm at such a young age and have such terrifying and unparalleled combat power. The Federal University is indeed the holy land of psychic masters. In terms of martial artists, other universities can still compare. However, in terms of psychic masters, no university can compare. This is the foundation. In addition to the discussions of the audience, many students and teachers of the capital university and other schools, as well as the school's higher-ups, began to pay attention to Lu Feng. They naturally knew how terrifying Lu Feng's combat power was. However, when they reported the news to their superiors, there was no response at all. It was as if the higher-ups of their schools were indifferent to this matter. However, this was the reality of the situation. Those higher-ups were really indifferent. They didn't care about the news about Lu Feng at all. These existences only cared about the final Pinnacle tournament. Other than the Pinnacle tournament, nothing else could attract their attention. Moreover, these existences also understood that no matter how monstrous Lu Feng was, he was still a psychic master. At the level of martial artists, psychic masters were no match for martial artists. Moreover, psychic masters' speed of improvement was destined to be incomparable to pinnacle martial artists. Therefore, many higher-ups chose to ignore Lu Feng's existence directly. Of course, this wasn't the case for all of them. Some small schools still attached great importance to it. After all, they all knew that the Pinnacle tournament had nothing to do with them. Therefore, the competition between the 4 grades outside of the Pinnacle tournament was their main focus. However, it was a pity that the people who investigated Lu Feng were all small schools. Their abilities were limited, and the Federal University deliberately blocked them. Therefore, these schools couldn't find any traces of Lu Feng's existence. It only took a short time for Lu Feng to arrive at the arena where Mu Shuiyan was. Looking at Mu Shuiyan, who was constantly dodging in the arena and was unable to resist, Lu Feng only sighed slightly. He knew that Mu Shuiyan was definitely going to fail this time. Mu Shuiyan's opponent was a true psychic master. Although Mu Shuiyan had already reached the pinnacle of psychic master, there was still a huge barrier between psychic masters and psychic masters. This kind of gap was very difficult to bridge if one wasn't monstrous. Mu Shuiyan was obviously not monstrous. Therefore, her failure was completely within his expectations. Finally, with a powerful attack from her opponent, Mu Shuiyan's defense collapsed in an instant. If her opponent hadn't stopped at the crucial moment, Mu Shuiyan would have been injured. Chapter 600. Mu Shuiyan stood in the arena. Although she had lost, she was a little disappointed. However, Mu Shuiyan was not too excited or dissatisfied. After all, she had already resolved the knot in her heart. Therefore, Mu Shuiyan did not find it too hard to accept. After the referee announced the end of the match, Mu Shuiyan turned around and was about to leave. Unfortunately, at this moment, the voice of his opponent, the Psyche Master from Capital University, was heard. Beauty, the Federal University's era is over. From now on, it's time for Capital University. What do you think? Why don't you transfer here? With my status, it shouldn't be a problem for me to help you transfer here. The Psyche Master looked at Mu Shuiyan with a smile. A trace of greed flashed across his eyes. Mu Shuiyan's strength and fighting skills were undoubtedly outstanding. In Capital University, there were only 2 or 3 people who could defeat her. In addition, Mu Shuiyan's beauty attracted the Psyche Master. Unfortunately, even if Lu Feng did not exist, Mu Shuiyan would not be interested in such a person. Therefore, after coldly glancing at that person, Mu Shuiyan's voice clearly spread throughout the entire arena and the surrounding space. Whether the Federal University is weak or not is not something a mere person like you can judge. Besides, I have no interest in people like you. After speaking, Mu Shuiyan turned around and walked down the arena. The Psyche Master's face was twisted in anger. As the main character of the sophomore Psyche faculty of the Capital University, his existence could be said to be incomparably noble. However, at this moment, a girl had disrespected him in front of so many people. She had even said such words. How could he accept this? You. Stop right there. Her face was flushed red, and there was a slight twist to it. Seeing this scene, many people revealed a slightly interested expression. Compared to a battle, this kind of thing was undoubtedly much more entertaining. Mu Shuiyan stood still, there was no trace of fear on her face. This was because she had already seen Lu Feng. She saw Lu Feng smiling at her. "Do you have anything else to say?" Mu Shuyan's eyes were full of sarcasm. This made the Psyche Master's face even more twisted. He looked at Mu Shuyan and said through gritted teeth, Are you looking down on me?" Hearing this, the entire arena fell silent. Everyone was quietly watching everything in front of them. Their interest had been completely aroused. If it was any other girl facing this situation, it would be difficult for her to deal with it. After all, there was nothing they could do in this situation. One had to know that the gazes of a monster and 2 million people were not something that anyone could easily withstand. However, Mu Shuyan was not an ordinary person. After going through so much, she was not afraid. In addition, Lu Feng was standing behind her. He was the #1 person of the younger generation. She was not afraid at all. She tilted her head slightly and even deliberately showed a mischievous look. This scene was obviously a little surprising. After all, Mu Shuyan's cold temperament made such a move. It was obviously very surprising. She seemed to be thinking about something and even pretended to be distressed. In the end, Mu Shuyan nodded directly under the gaze of such people. "Compared to my lover, you are nothing. Not to mention him, even my good friend is far better than you. So, why should I think highly of you?" The silence in the arena was even more obvious. These people stared dumbfoundedly at the naive Mu Shuyan, as if they couldn't believe that these words had just come out of her mouth. "Why should I think highly of you? What qualifications do you have for me to think highly of you?" Without a doubt, this was a huge sarcasm. It was a blatant slap in the face. Everyone believed that if Mu Shuyan was not a girl and was not a beauty, the psychic from Capital University would have already made his move and completely suppressed her. Even so, the psychic's demonic expression changed countless times at this moment. After a long time, he took countless deep breaths and finally calmed his emotions down. At this moment, a strange smile appeared on his face. Looking at Mu Shuyan, he slowly said, "Since that's the case, I wonder if your monstrous lover and genius friend will be participating in this year's large competition? I'd like to see if they're really as terrifying as you say." There was a bloodthirsty look in his eyes. No one doubted that if the 2 people that Mu Shuyan had mentioned were standing in the arena at this moment, the psychic from Capital University would definitely make his move without holding back. After all, he could not do anything to a defeated girl in front of everyone. However, he had no scruples when it came to men. Mu Shuyan wanted to say something, but before she could say anything, a voice came from below the arena. "Our young mistress Mu is right. Not to mention her lover, even I am not someone that trash like you can casually provoke." Everyone looked in the direction of the voice. At this moment, a figure was walking in the air and slowly walked up to the arena. Looking at the person who appeared, Mu Shuyan smiled slyly. The person who appeared was Su Wenchao. Although Su Wenchao was usually extremely wretched and unreliable, he would never strike a blow to others or say harsh words. It could be said that he was the noble young master of the Su family. He was really different from the other arrogant young masters. He was completely different. However, at this moment, when facing the top genius from Capital University, he directly called him trash. It was obvious that Su Wenchao was furious at this moment. Seeing Su Wenchao walk up to the arena, the genius psychic from Capital University did not have any mocking or angry expression. He only looked at Su Wenchao with a serious expression. After a long time, he suddenly revealed a slightly shocked expression. At this moment, his expression was extremely ugly. After a while, he finally spoke. "You are the young master of the Su family, Su Wenchao?" Su Wenchao's existence was not a secret. Many people knew about it. This time, as a real student of the Federal University, Su Wenchao's existence naturally attracted special attention. Moreover, Su Wenchao did not have the Divine Clan's life chart cultivation method that Lu Feng had learned from Jiahua Wu. Naturally, those who had seen his image could easily recognize him when they saw him. Hearing this, Su Wenchao only smiled coldly. I didn't expect you to recognize me. I wonder how you are going to teach us a lesson? I am standing here now. You are free to use whatever means you have. I would like to see how you, a student who wants to become the #1 university, will teach a student from a declining school like me a lesson. The genius psychic from Capital University did not hide his words at all. Therefore, many people below the stage heard it. Naturally, Su Wenchao, who had arrived early, also heard it clearly. What did it mean to be one's alma mater? It meant that one could scold it 1,000 times, but not allow others to say anything bad about it. Moreover, the existence of the Federal University was really extraordinary. It was worthy of the name of the #1 university of the human race in the current Federation. As a student of the Federal University, how could Su Wenchao just stand by and watch others insult it? Therefore, even without Mu Xuyan's words, Su Wenchao would still walk out and let everyone know the strength of the Federal University. That person stood in the same spot with an extremely ugly expression. At this moment, he no longer had the sarcasm, confidence, and anger from before. The only expression he had now was a twisted expression. This was an expression that was complicated to the point of being twisted. He naturally knew what kind of existence Su Wenchao was. This was the most famous psychic freak in the Federation recently. Freak. This was a freak. Although he was a psychic, the current Su Wenchao could already be crowned as an emperor. He had become the 8th emperor in the Federation and even the human race. Moreover, Su Wenchao's strength had already reached the level of an intermediate psychic, which was one level higher than his. Moreover, Su Wenchao's talent was stronger than his. Therefore, if he were to fight with Su Wenchao, he would definitely lose. He had just said those words, but now he was being slapped in the face by Su Wenchao. Although his heart was filled with anger, he did not dare to show it. After all, Su Wenchao was the young master of the Su family. This genius psychic from Capital University naturally understood and understood. Capital University was still not comparable to the Federal University. Facing this terrifying young master of a major family, who was basically equivalent to the top 10 of the first-rate families, he definitely could not easily go against him. As for himself, he did not have a strong background. Therefore, when facing Su Wenchao, his strength was not enough, his background was not enough, and everything else was not enough. Therefore, no matter how angry he was, he could only endure and force himself to endure. In the end, the genius could only lower his head with a twisted expression. I'm sorry, young Master Su. I take back what I just said. This time I was wrong. His fists were already clenched tightly. Although there was too much anger and too much unwillingness, when facing Su Wenchao, the young master of the Su family, the only thing he could do was let go of everything. Unfortunately, this time, he had not only offended Su Wenchao, but also humiliated the Federal University. Just this alone was enough to make Su Wenchao unable to let it go. Moreover, he had even publicly expressed his desire for Mu Xuyan. Who was Mu Xuyan? She was not only his good friend and classmate, but also his good brother's lover. Humiliating his brother's lover was equivalent to humiliating himself. How could Su Wenchao accept this so easily? Su Wenchao stared coldly at the genius before finally exhaling softly. He smiled faintly. However, this smile contained an extremely cold expression. This time, whether I forgive you or not is no longer important. Since you have already said it, you will have to pay the corresponding price. Moreover, I'm not the only one who wants to ask you for advice. You better pray for yourself. After saying this, Su Wenchao suddenly said to the person beside him, Isn't that right, Lu Feng? Countless people looked at the man beside Su Wenchao in shock. No one knew when he had appeared, but he was quietly walking towards Mu Xuyan. They really couldn't understand when Lu Feng had appeared, and how he had appeared. It seemed as if he had been there all along. It was just that no one had noticed him. Of course, the most shocked person at the moment was the telekinesis genius from the capital university. He looked at Lu Feng with a slightly dazed expression. Besides Mu Shiyan and Su Wenchao, there had been no one else in the arena. He was very sure of this. However, Lu Feng had appeared in front of him in such a strange way. He had appeared in his line of sight and right in front of him. It was only now that he finally realized that there was actually a fourth person in the arena. This kind of shock was even more shocking than when he saw that the person who came was Su Wenchao. After all, this meant that his strength was far beyond his own. As he watched Lu Feng walk over to Mu Shiyan and gently embrace her, he felt really sad. He really wanted to suffer for once. What he had said before was just a casual remark. As for lecturing Mu Shiyan's lover and friend, it was just a moment of impulse. After all, anyone would be angry if Mu Shiyan had said such things on such an occasion. However, at this moment, he finally understood that some words could not be said casually. The existence of the young master of the Su family was not something he could compare to. And now, an extreme existence that was so terrifying that he couldn't even sense the slightest bit of had walked out. All of this made him extremely regretful. It was a pity that it was too late to say these things now. Therefore, at this moment, he could only stand in the arena expressionlessly and watch the changes around him. Lu Feng did not even look at him. For such a conceited person with amazing talent, there were always some who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. They had never seen a true supreme existence or a true devilish genius, so they would never know just how terrifying this world was and how powerful these existences were. Finally, after a few words with Mu Shiyan, Lu Feng looked at the telekinesis master. Chapter 601. Since you want to challenge me, I'll be waiting. I believe that with your current cultivation as a spiritual psychic, you should be able to meet me. I hope that when the time comes, you can still say these words again. Gently holding Mu Shiyan's arm, the three of them left the place under the watchful eyes of the crowd. In the arena, the genius psychic from Capital University stood quietly in place, speechless. Mu Shiyan's failure was completely expected. Moreover, after experiencing what happened just now, Mu Shiyan wasn't as depressed as before. The afternoon competition was over. Now, the top 32 of the 4 psychics had been decided. Tomorrow was the day of the competition for the top 16. Once they entered the top 16, they would be able to enter the competition for the year Apex. The year Apex was different from the competition between psychics and warriors. The title of the strongest of the 4 grades was still somewhat valuable. Although it was not as good as the year Apex, in the eyes of many people, it represented a certain level of strength. To participate in the year Apex, one must enter the top 16 of the psychics and warriors. Before leaving, Zhongling had told Lu Feng that she wanted Lu Feng to participate in 3 competitions, including this year's year Apex. Those who knew the rules naturally looked at Lu Feng in a new light. After all, to enter the top 16, one's strength must be shocking. However, Zhongling still said such a thing, proving that she had incomparable confidence in Lu Feng. The next day came quickly. Lu Feng, Qi Yunqing, and Su Wenchao were all triumphant. According to the groups, as long as there were no accidents, Lu Feng would meet Su Wenchao in the finals. As for whether Su Wenchao could enter the finals, Lu Feng was not worried at all. This was because there might be some geniuses among them, but none of them could compete with Su Wenchao. This time, if he hadn't participated in these competitions, Su Wenchao would have been first in the psychic division, and Qi Yunqing would have been first in the warrior division. However, for the sake of safety, he still participated. Moreover, with Lu Feng's character, as long as he participated, he would not allow failure. Therefore, this time, it was destined to be a fratricide. The next morning's match soon began, and this time, Lu Feng was no longer alone. Lulu had nothing to do yesterday afternoon. After all, Kong Ting had been eliminated. But in order to let Kong Ting release herself as soon as possible, Lulu dragged Kong Ting to go shopping together, leaving Lu Feng alone. However, it was different this time. He had Lulu, Kong Ting, He Lufei and Mu Shuyan by his side. Such a cheering team was undoubtedly very attractive, and Lu Feng did not disappoint everyone. He had completely replicated everything from yesterday. As soon as he came up, a terrifying Xian grenade fell, and the battle ended in an instant. The genius psychic from Capital University, who had watched Lu Feng's performance in the ring, was now extremely pale. He finally knew why Mu Shuyan had said those words. Indeed, whether it was Su Wenchao or Lu Feng, he was far from being able to compete with or surpass them. The existence of these two people was destined to be the highest peak that he would never be able to reach in his life. At that moment, when he saw Lu Feng's performance, he even trembled slightly. Although Lu Feng had only defeated a pinnacle Psyche Master with that blow, he had still been able to defeat the Psyche Master. He also understood that if he had been in Lu Feng's place, there would have been no difference. If he had been in Lu Feng's place, the result would have been the same. Even the time spent resisting would have been no different. This was because that Xian grenade was far from what he could resist at his level. Looking in the direction that Lu Feng had left, he finally seemed to have made up his mind and turned to leave. Lu Feng had won and smoothly advanced to the top 16. This also meant that he had obtained a place in the annual competition. Lulu had originally wanted to celebrate at noon. However, just as they were about to head to the private room in Capital University's cafeteria, someone stopped them. "You must be Lu Feng." A middle-aged man blocked Lu Feng's path and spoke in a friendly tone. However, Lu Feng could not see any kindness in his eyes. Looking at the Capital University's emblem on his chest, Lu Feng knew that this person must be a teacher from Capital University. Although he did not like being stopped, Lu Feng still nodded politely. "I am. What can I do for you?" The middle-aged teacher hesitated for a moment before continuing with a smile. "It's like this. I am Zhao Shu's teacher." Lu Feng furrowed his brows, a trace of confusion appearing on his face. When he saw Lu Feng's expression, the teacher seemed to have realized something and hurriedly explained. "It's like this. Zhao Shu is the psychic who offended you and young Master Su yesterday." After hearing this, Lu Feng understood. His expression was no longer the same as before. Lu Feng's furrowed brows didn't relax. He looked at the teacher and directly said, "You're here to plead for him?" Lu Feng's voice was no longer as respectful as before. When he sensed Lu Feng's attitude, a hint of anger flashed across the teacher's eyes. However, when he thought about how this concerned the existence of his precious student, the teacher suppressed the indignation in his heart. Indeed, yesterday, Zhao Shu did not know the immensity of heaven and earth and offended the two of you. This time, I am here to apologize on his behalf. I hope that the two of you can forgive his mistake. Apologizing as a teacher was undoubtedly a show of sincerity. After all, this teacher was a king-level psychic master. If it had been anyone else, they would have just let it go. Unfortunately, neither Su Wenchao nor Lu Feng cared about this teacher's status or his king-level psychic master cultivation base. As he looked at the teacher, Lu Feng said without hesitation, "Why should we forgive him?" In an instant, the teacher lifted his head and stared at Lu Feng in disbelief. It seemed as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. After all, apologizing to Lu Feng with his status was already a show of sincerity. However, Lu Feng had actually given such an answer. This was really inconceivable. His expression became incomparably gloomy and ugly at this moment. He was a king-level psychic master, the most respected psychic master among all professions. He was even a king-level psychic master. In terms of status, Even a peak demigod might not necessarily be comparable to him. However, at this moment, he had actually received such an answer when he had come to apologize with his current status and position. As he looked at Lu Feng, the teacher took a deep breath and said with difficulty, "Don't you think this is too much?" He had already given up his dignity to apologize, yet Lu Feng still had such an attitude. Wasn't this too much? Lu Feng looked at him. His expression was as cold as ever, without the slightest change. Finally, he opened his mouth slowly and said, "Am I being too much? Right now, I just want to ask one thing. If I didn't have the ability to crush your student, if I didn't have the Federal University behind me, would you still be here? Then, would you still be here? Would he still be here? Of course, he wouldn't." Everyone clearly understood this point. He had come here as a teacher because of Lu Feng's ability, because of the Su family's background, and because of the Federal University behind them. If my ability and background weren't good enough, then perhaps in your eyes, your students' actions would still be domineering and imposing. In the end, everything is because of the problem of ability. I have the ability, so you have to bow and scrape. I don't have the ability, so you have to bully me. It's a pity that this time, I am a person with ability. My strength and background aren't something you can compare to. That's why you are here. Am I right? Hearing this, the teacher's face flushed red, but he couldn't refute anything. Because everything Lu Feng said was true, any quibbling would be futile. Looking at the teacher's appearance, Lu Feng smiled coldly. "Of course, I'll give you a chance. If he doesn't dare to fight in the afternoon, then as his teacher, you can fight in his place. I don't care. I don't care at all." Hearing Lu Feng's words, the teacher was stunned. He was completely stunned. He had never heard of such a thing. Letting a teacher fight in his place? If Lu Feng was a warrior or a descendant of an aristocratic family, then he might have believed it. After all, martial artists had heaven-defying bloodlines. If they went crazy, it was possible for them to completely obliterate themselves at this age. However, Lu Feng was only a spirit master. If a spirit master wanted to advance, they would need countless years of accumulation. Generally, a spirit master's ability could be estimated by looking at their age. A spirit master like the human king, who could become a true god before the age of 20, didn't exist at all. Therefore, in the eyes of this spirit master Wang, Lu Feng didn't have any cultivation at all. However, if he, a teacher, fought against a student, he would definitely be scolded if he won. After all, the difference in status and age between the two of them was too big. However, he thought about it a lot. The teacher was really a little hesitant. He really couldn't watch his disciple be completely suppressed like this. He also couldn't tolerate Lu Feng's previous humiliation. Seeing that the teacher was slightly moved, Lu Feng's smile was filled with endless mockery. Finally, he seemed to have thought of something. He looked at the teacher and said, "You should have a spirit master teaching building here." Chapter 602. This was completely ironic. The capital university was determined to surpass the Federal University. Other small universities might not have such luxurious facilities, but the capital university definitely had them. There was no doubt that Lu Feng's words made the teacher feel very uncomfortable. However, he didn't continue to make the teacher feel uncomfortable. Instead, he said something that made the teacher feel happy for the first time. "I know that you people want to save face. In that case, I will give you a chance. Find a secluded place, and we'll have a duel. If you win, then I won't pursue the matter any further. If I win, then I don't want anything else. I just want him to publicly apologize to me and withdraw from the competition. Can you accept this?" A public apology wasn't a big deal. After all, he had already publicly apologized when he had offended Lu Feng. As for withdrawing from the competition, it wasn't a big deal either. If he could defeat him, He would be tortured if he continued to compete. Therefore, it was completely fine. However, the teacher didn't immediately agree. Instead, he glanced at Su Wenchao, who was beside Lu Feng. In his eyes, the young master of the Su family was the one who was really worth paying attention to. After all, the existence of the Su family was absolutely terrifying to anyone. Su Wenchao just shrugged, indicating that he didn't care. After seeing this scene, the teacher finally agreed. Lu Feng just smiled mockingly. He knew that these people were too hypocritical. They were obviously very happy, but they still pretended to be very uncomfortable. Lu Feng really disdained such hypocritical people. Then let's go. After saying this, the teacher nodded and led the way. They left the place. The place they chose was not a very secluded place. It was just a very ordinary Psyche Master Center. However, because of the competition, there were not many people here. It was very quiet. At this moment, only the teacher, Lu Feng, Lulu, and a few others appeared here. The place was unusually empty and there was a strange kind of oppressive atmosphere. Of course, Lu Feng didn't care. Back then, the places he had been to were even more terrifying and dangerous. They were all filled with mysteries and unknowns. There was also a small competition ring here. It was specially designed for psychic masters to use, so it couldn't be compared with those warriors in terms of size. Lu Feng didn't hesitate either. He only took a few steps to reach the ring. It was clear that Lu Feng's clean and tidy actions made the teacher feel slightly startled. After all, no one would be so careless in an unfamiliar place. However, after a brief moment, a hint of joy appeared in his eyes. Because he knew that doing so would prove that Lu Feng was a rash person. Generally speaking, such people were extremely confident in their own strength. This naturally explained why Lu Feng wanted to issue a challenge. So-called geniuses are just a group of people who are naturally more outstanding. They have never experienced painful tempering and have never known the immensity of heaven and earth. They always think that they are already invincible in this generation. Such an existence is actually very pitiful. Psychic Master Wang used to be a genius. He was even a genius at the pinnacle. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to become a Psychic Master Wang at such a young age. He used to be like this too. He was conceited about his peerless talent and didn't put anyone in his eyes. However, after almost dying in the foreign battlefields several times, he finally recognized himself and was no longer so arrogant and ignorant. In his opinion, the current Lu Feng was just like him in the past. He didn't know what to do and was completely ignorant. Without any hesitation, he also took a step forward and walked onto the arena. However, he didn't start immediately. Instead, he looked at Lu Feng and asked, "I want to confirm again if what you said is true. If I can win, then I won't pursue this matter. Even the forces behind you won't pursue this matter." Lu Feng was expressionless. He only said coldly, "I don't care about hiding anything from you. As long as you can defeat me, then everything will vanish. Whether it's me or Su Wenchao, we won't pursue this matter." After hearing this last confirmation, the Psychic Master Wang no longer hid anything and revealed a satisfied expression. He looked at Lu Feng and said slowly, "In that case, I'll go easy on you later. After all, Zhao Shu was in the wrong before. Actually, this battle won't benefit you at all. At least this will let you see clearly that in this world, talent doesn't determine everything. In many cases, talent isn't that important." As he spoke, his powerful aura had already fluctuated. He looked at Lu Feng. Although he was smiling, this Psychic Master Wang's expression turned slightly cold in the end. Do you know that in many places, strength is the only thing that matters? Even if you have peerless talent, it's still useless. In that chaotic area, they won't let you go just because of your peerless talent. In this world, strength is always the most eternal thing. The so-called importance of talent is only because you have the possibility of becoming a powerhouse more easily than others. That's why you are valued so much." The moment he finished speaking, the might of a psychic master Wang was completely unleashed. At this moment, the psychic master Wang was a true psychic master. In Lu Feng's opinion, this psychic master Wang's power was actually much stronger than Zhong Ling's. Zhong Ling was a beginner-level psychic master, so this psychic master Wang from Capital University had to be an intermediate-level psychic master. However, regardless of whether he was an intermediate-level psychic master or a beginner-level psychic master, what difference did it make to Lu Fenglai? His body's strength had already reached the peak of the psychic master realm. His strength could even easily suppress a peak god. An intermediate-level psychic master Wang was nothing at all. In the face of such strength, Lu Feng only had one word in mind, and that was suppress. Lu Feng was towering and unmoving. He was like an endless mountain peak. No matter how the wind howled, he didn't show any signs of abnormality. His eyes were still as cold as ever. They were like the eyes of a god. He was pitying the world. When he sensed that his power was unable to cause even the slightest disturbance to Lu Feng, a strange look flashed across the psychic master Wang's face. However, his voice was transmitted in the next moment. As expected of an exceptional genius or even a demon from the Federal University, you actually have such a treasure protecting you. It seems like your university is really good to you. In the eyes of this psychic master Wang, Lu Feng had relied on some treasure to resist his terrifying power. No wonder you dared to challenge me. However, don't you know, a passive treasure will always be passive. At most, it can resist my aura. Once I use my true killing power, what can you do? What kind of treasure can you unleash all of its power? In the next moment, he moved. Although he didn't have the terrifying speed of a martial artist who could almost be called a small space movement, at this moment, his speed was still not perfect. This time, a martial artist could see clearly and grasp it. Get lost. The moment his voice was heard, he disappeared. In the next moment, he reappeared. In his eyes, there was a happy smile. It was as if he could see Lu Feng severely injured and sent flying backward, trembling all over. Who was he? He was a psychic master Wang. Not to mention that he had the Capital University behind him. Just his identity as a mid-level psychic master Wang made his status comparable to any peak demigod. However, he had come to apologize so humbly but received such treatment. Although in the end, Lu Feng had said that the battle would resolve everything, the humiliation of Xiao had always been there. Moreover, Lu Feng's challenge made him feel even worse. After all, he was a teacher, and Lu Feng was just a student. A student dared to challenge him so shamelessly. This was a complete denial of his abilities. He was also a genius. The dignity of a genius was countless times higher than that of an ordinary person. How could he endure such naked contempt? Therefore, this time, he didn't hold back at all. He directly unleashed all of his most powerful power. Tremble! Tremble! At this moment, in this small psychic master teaching building, all of the space was shaking. This was a manifestation of suppressing power, condensing power to the limit of space. If he waited until he became a god, then this compressed power would be even more terrifying and exceed the limit of space. At that time, it would truly shatter the void. Although he hadn't reached that level yet, his current power couldn't be underestimated. This was a complete suppression of mind power without any psychic technique. However, once all of his power was unleashed, then the entire capital city would be reduced to ashes. Although Wang's psyche masters weren't a match for perfect stage warriors, their destructive power was astonishing. It was only because it took a long time to use the Psyche Master's techniques that they weren't a match for warriors of the same level before the apotheosized realm. However, once they were given enough time, the terrifying destructive power they unleashed would surpass that of warriors of the same level. Below the ring, except for Kong Ting, no one had the slightest difference. These people had all seen Lu Feng's strength or believed in Lu Feng's strength. In his world, in his era, in his battles, Lu Feng was the emperor, the greatest existence. How could the greatest existence be defeated? How could he be defeated by someone? Therefore, Lu Feng made his move. Chapter 603. Get lost. What a simple word, what a simple wave of the hand. Everything was so simple that it made Su Wenchao and the others feel strange, and made the king's psychic master panic. Boundless. Compared to the power of the king's psychic master, what Lu Feng showed at this moment was truly boundless. It was overwhelming and surging. Shock, sluggishness, confusion, and panic. At this moment, the king's psychic master finally understood how ridiculous his previous words were, and how stupid his previous provocation was. This kind of power was not something a student should have. Even the monstrous geniuses of their generation would at most be on par with such an aura. Just now, he didn't rely on any treasure to resist his aura. Instead, he relied on himself to forcefully resist everything. Unfortunately, it was too late to know this now. Everything was too late. If he had known all of this earlier, then he would not have come here to help his student apologize, because that was only his student. However, at this moment, the one who was humiliated, in danger, and in pain was himself. All of these thoughts were completed in an instant. Before he had time to regret, he had already flown out. The body of a psychic master was known to be incomparably weak. After becoming a great psychic master, he had already begun to temper his body. However, the process of tempering a psychic master's body was extremely painful. This king's psychic master had also tempered his body. However, the degree of his tempering was limited. Not to mention compared to a warrior of the same level, he could not even be compared to a warrior of the evolution stage. It was far from comparable. Therefore, serious injuries were inevitable. His body flew out, and in an instant, he crashed through 2 walls. This was a kind of alloy wall. Although it was not particularly strong, it was still much harder than ordinary stone materials. At this moment, using his body to completely destroy these 2 walls, the pain he had to endure would be unimaginable. The next moment, Lu Feng was already standing in front of him. Lu Feng's control and grasp of power had reached a kind of peak state. Ordinary people simply could not compare to him at all. After all, the taboo king represented the pinnacle of a realm. Lu Feng was not a person who liked to kill, nor was he an indecisive person. This was the capital university, and he represented the federal university. If it was not the most serious offense, Lu Feng would not directly kill someone. Therefore, this time, the king's psychic master was only seriously injured and fell to the ground. However, he would not die. At this moment, the king's psychic master's eyes were filled with a kind of incomparable complexity. He knew that Lu Feng would not kill him, because if he wanted to kill him, then there would not be any difficulty at all. However, he was still alive, which proved that Lu Feng did not intend to kill him. As he looked at Lu Feng with great difficulty, the king's psychic master's heart was in a complete mess. A casual attack could kill a mid-level king's psychic master. Was this the kind of strength that the younger generation should possess? This was too exaggerated. Who exactly are you? He asked with great difficulty. However, Lu Feng still did not reply. He just stared coldly at the king's psychic master. After a long time, Lu Feng finally said something. I hope you remember your promise. Otherwise, I would not care that much about the capital university. The king's psychic master trembled slightly. He knew that Lu Feng was definitely not wrong. At this moment, he finally understood that he, who was with the young master of the Su family, might really be a good friend of the young master of the Su family. However, he was definitely not his follower or anything like that. He was the real main character. This kind of shocking existence definitely could not have become such a terrifying existence in such a short period of time just by relying on his own cultivation. There had to be a truly terrifying and unparalleled power behind him. Although the capital university was not bad, it was far from being comparable to the Federal University. It could even be compared to the powerful first-rate families and the pinnacle of intergalactic consortiums, such as the BUCC and the Federation Bank. If the young man before him was really determined to make the capital university disappear, then perhaps there was really a possibility. Silence. Complete silence. After a moment, he finally nodded his head with great difficulty. "What I promised, I will do. In the next competition, I will have Zhao Shu go up the stage and apologize personally." As he said this, his face turned extremely pale. The attack just now had caused him to suffer heavy injuries. In addition, facing Lu Feng's strength now, his heart was in turmoil, causing his injuries to worsen. When he saw the king's psychic master in this state, Lu Feng did not feel any pity for him. After experiencing so much on the foreign battlefields, he had already seen everything clearly. Unless it was his own family, then what did other existences have to do with him? Moreover, this was someone who had offended him. Lu Feng turned around and left. However, after taking a few steps, he suddenly stopped. At this moment, Lu Feng did not turn his head, but his voice had already traveled over. "The place where strength is respected is the foreign battlefields, right? That is indeed a place of killing. Over there, the number of existences that have died by my hands is uncountable." Such a small interlude did not affect anything. After all, these people were not ordinary existences. However, after witnessing Lu Feng's strength this time, Kong Ting worshipped Lu Feng very much. In the past, she had only heard about it. She had never seen it for herself. However, the strength Lu Feng displayed this time made her heart tremble. Psychic Master Wang. In the Federal University, he had the strength of at least a second-year teacher. However, in front of Lu Feng, this kind of strength could not even resist with a wave of his hand. At this moment, Kong Ting finally knew that what Lu Fei had told her about Lu Feng being able to easily obliterate immortals was completely true. "Cousin Lu Feng, how did you cultivate? How could you be so powerful and terrifying as a psychic master?" Kong Ting already knew that Lu Feng was the young master of the human king Lu family. As the young master of the Lu family, she had never seen his combat strength as a martial artist. Neither had Lu Fei. However, they did not doubt it at all. That was because the human king Lu family represented the number one combat strength in the world. However, regarding the human king Lu family's bloodline actually having such high attainments and strength as a psychic master, this puzzled her. After all, a psychic master and a martial artist could not cultivate at the same time. Moreover, with Lu Feng's identity as the young master, the human king Lu family would not be able to make Lu Feng give up his martial artist identity and convert his bloodline power into mind power. Kong Ting looked at Lu Feng with a face full of adoration. Sensing such an expression, Lu Feng smiled faintly. "I am considered a special existence that cannot be replicated. Being able to walk to where I am today is partly because of my talent, partly because of my opportunities, and partly because of my hardships." Regardless of whether it was his talent, his opportunities, or his cultivation techniques, these were indeed effective and accounted for a part of his success. However, compared to the help that his hardships gave him, all of these were nothing. Because it was precisely those endless hardships that allowed him to walk to where he was today, allowing him to break through at an unimaginable speed and become the taboo king of today. Although Kong Ting did not understand very well, she still nodded and said according to her understanding, "I heard that those peak geniuses who want to take a step forward need to experience countless trials and tribulations. I think the trials and tribulations that cousin Lu Feng mentioned are referring to the trials and tribulations that the children of aristocratic families have to go through after they reach adulthood. Lu Feng smiled and nodded. You can say that. You have to remember that if you want to become a true powerhouse, then you have to experience endless trials and tribulations. Only then will you have the qualifications to reach the peak in the future. Seeing Lu Feng's solemn expression, the few of them also became solemn. They all nodded their heads because they had often heard these words before. The people who said these words were their elders, those God-level existences. However, at this moment, when it came from Lu Feng's mouth, it made them even more convinced. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's eat first. The competition in the afternoon is about to begin. Wenchao, I will be waiting for you in the finals. Don't let me down. When he heard Lu Feng's words, Su Wenchao tried hard to roll his eyes. After glancing at Lu Feng, he said, "Fight with a freak like you? Am I tired of living? I am no match for Psychic Master Wang now. Although I am a freak, he is at least a peak genius. Even such an existence was defeated by you with a wave of your hand. How can I fight him?" This was the truth. Although Su Wenchao was a freak with terrifying strength and could easily challenge those of a higher level, he was no match for Lu Feng at all. In terms of realm, he was more than a level lower than Lu Fenglai. In terms of ability to challenge those of a higher level, the difference was too great. It was almost double the difference. Under these circumstances, there was no way to resist at all. Young Master Su was not the kind of masochist who would insist on fighting even if he knew it was impossible. Seeing Su Wenchao's appearance, Lu Feng could only helplessly shrug his shoulders and say nothing more. The battle in the afternoon soon began. As expected, Zhao Shu did not hesitate at all after entering the arena. Under the gaze of 5 million people, he directly expressed his deep apologies to Lu Feng, Su Wenchao, and Mu Xuan. In addition, after saying these words, Zhao Shu directly announced his decision to withdraw from the competition. Obviously, such a scene caused a huge sensation. Countless people began to spread praise everywhere. A situation like today's was unprecedented. Although there had been cases of people withdrawing from competitions before, those cases were all for various reasons. Moreover, those reasons could also be acknowledged. However, it was the first time that someone had inexplicably withdrawn from a competition like today's. Below, countless voices of abuse were constantly heard. On the arena, Zhao Shu's expression was extremely ugly and gloomy. He naturally knew how much damage such a thing would cause to him, but he had no choice but to do so. Although his teacher did not say anything to him when he returned, Zhao Shu could see the endless loneliness in his teacher's eyes. He had never seen such a look in his teacher's eyes before. His teacher's existence, even among the younger generation of Psyche Masters, belonged to the pinnacle of existence. Therefore, he was high-spirited and had never thought that he had failed. But now, such an old look appeared in Zhao Shu's heart. It appeared in the eyes of his teacher, who had never failed. Such a shock made Zhao Shu really at a loss and despair. He understood that if it was not a huge shock, then how could his teacher have such an expression? Therefore, this time, he did not hesitate at all. Even if he had to bear such a great humiliation, and even if his reputation fell into the abyss from then on, he did not hesitate. Looking at Zhao Shu beside him, Lu Feng only took one last look before leaving. Because Zhao Shu had already admitted defeat, there was no point in staying. Just like that, Lu Feng directly entered the next round of the competition. There was no doubt that Lu Feng had now become the focus of attention and the topic of countless people's discussion. Since the beginning of the first round, Lu Feng basically did not make a move or only used one move to achieve complete victory. Such strength and speed would only appear in the preliminaries of the major universities. This was the first time it had appeared on the stage of the inter-school tournament. Moreover, it was precisely because of Lu Feng that many people began to look forward to Psyche Masters this time. After all, in the past years of the Interschool Tournament and the Pinnacle Tournament, it had always been the warriors who emerged as the final victors. But now, with the strength that Lu Feng had shown, those people had reason to believe that Psyche Masters could also win the final victory. Countless people were crazily paying attention to Lu Feng. If it were not for the fact that recording was not allowed in this competition, then Lu Feng would have become the most famous topic of the human race. Even so, it still attracted countless people to start talking about him. Among them were the two top universities, the Government University and the Capital University. Unfortunately, Lu Feng had used the Sacred Race's fate chart cultivation method. Unless they knew him before and confirmed it in person, it was absolutely impossible to recognize him. This was the mystery of the Sacred Race's cultivation method. It was also because of this reason that even though the top figures of the two universities clearly knew about Lu Feng and even had his image through a special method, they were unable to connect the two of them. Naturally, Lu Feng also knew about this situation. At this moment, he could not help but sigh at the terror of the Sacred Race's cultivation method. Chapter 604. With my current strength, no one can see through the Sacred Race's cultivation technique unless they are a peerless almighty. No one will be able to recognize my existence. Although Lu Feng's strength wasn't strong, the power and profoundness of a life chart cultivation technique were related to one's life chart in addition to one's strength and realm. Lu Feng's life chart was the infinitely great space-time emperor. He was the only one who had such an existence since ancient times. Even fate had to acknowledge his life chart. Therefore, although his strength wasn't good and his realm was also very low, the life chart cultivation technique he used was many times more powerful than Jiahua Wuyue's. On the following day, Lu Feng finished off his opponent in one move and entered the finals. This time, the number of people who came to watch the finals reached an astonishing 50 million people. One had to know that the warrior competition, as well as all the first-year, third-year, and fourth-year competitions, would start at the same time as the second-year telekinesis finals. Out of the 8 arenas, only the 2 fourth-year arenas had reached 50 million people. Only Lu Feng's current arena had attracted so many people's attention. In the arena, the two of them faced each other silently. As expected, Lu Feng's opponent was Su Wenchao. By now, many people knew about Su Wenchao's identity. Basically, he was the young master of one of the top 20 first-rate families in the Federation. He was a freak, but he had transformed his divine descendant bloodline into mind power. He had given up the path of an elite warrior and turned to walk the path of a telekinesis master. However, Su Wenchao's performance proved that his choice wasn't wrong. His strength really lived up to his monstrous reputation as the young master of the Su family. The confrontation between the two freaks was very interesting in itself. After all, freakish existences were enough to be titled as young emperors among the various top overlords. Furthermore, the two of them were students of the Federal University. Therefore, this battle was completely a civil war. Although many people did not think that Su Wenchao could win, they still hoped to see the battle between the two of them and the confrontation between the two monstrous talents. Unfortunately, it seemed like Su Wenchao was born to disappoint and make people feel uncomfortable. Many people had given up on other matches to come here just to watch the duel between them. However, Su Wenchao, whose strength was equally astonishing in the previous matches, had actually given up before the battle had even begun. This scene was clearly unacceptable to everyone. Previously, Zhao Shu's withdrawal from the competition was already considered very ridiculous. But now, in the finals, the demon-level young master of the Su family actually withdrew from the competition without any reason. This was too shocking. Just like the scene when Zhao Shu withdrew from the competition, Many people began to curse. However, in the face of those people, Su Wenchao only said one sentence to completely shut them up. That was, "If you think you're strong enough, you can come up and fight. It's a masochistic battle, only idiots would be interested in it." Although Su Wenchao was still despised by others after saying this, he was even labeled as a coward. However, it was a pity that young Master Su was naturally thick-skinned and didn't care about this at all. Of course, there were also people who understood him. Every monster was born with incomparable pride, and they would not allow themselves to be defeated casually. If he were to confront Lu Feng, he would definitely be crazily crushed, which would be very detrimental to his future growth. Therefore, it was understandable for people to give up. With the end of the battle, the matter regarding Lu Feng was completely blown up. Many people began to use various methods to investigate Lu Feng's specific identity. In their minds, such a shocking existence like Lu Feng definitely couldn't be cultivated casually. Sitting in the room, Su Wenchao didn't care about his image, as if he was paralyzed, which made people feel uncomfortable just looking at him. After glancing at Lu Feng, he slowly said, "Those idiots still want to see how you're going to torture me. I, young Master Su, have been wise all my life. How could I make such a mistake? How could I have such a stain on my record? Wait until the grand competition, let these people see your strength. I'm afraid no one will dare to say anything then." During the apex competition, the desolate Emperor and Qi Liang would probably appear. Over 20 young masters would also make an appearance. In addition, there was a direct descendant of a God-King clan whose name was still unknown. Such a luxurious lineup was enough to shock anyone. Of course, these existences couldn't do anything to Lu Feng. However, Su Wenchao knew that the desolate emperor of the primordial divine king clan was a terrifying opponent. He would definitely be able to make Lu Feng fight to his heart's content. When he thought of Lu Feng's god-slaying battle prowess and those people's stunned expressions, Su Wenchao couldn't help but feel a burst of pride. "Who asked you to talk about me? Who asked you to speak without knowing the truth? When the time comes, let's see who's the idiot." Thinking of this, Su Wenchao actually laughed as if there was no one around. Qi Yunqing, who was sitting beside him, hurriedly moved to the side, as if he didn't know Su Wenchao. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng could only shrug helplessly. These people knew that Su Wenchao often went crazy, so they were already used to this kind of situation and could handle it calmly. "Little Cheng, from tomorrow onwards, it will be the official grand competition for second-year psychic masters. How are your preparations going? Don't be suppressed by Feng Zi when the time comes." Seeing Qi Yunqing's appearance, Su Wenchao was naturally very unhappy, so he directly said these words. Unfortunately, hearing his gloating voice, Qi Yunqing said, "Don't worry. I won't be as cowardly as you. Who do you think I am? No matter what, I have to be strong. Fight until you're done. In any case, Feng Zi won't really embarrass me like that, right, Feng Zi?" After saying this, Qi Yunqing looked at Lu Feng and winked. Coupled with his sturdy body, his current appearance was really comparable to Su Wenchao's wretched appearance. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng shrugged helplessly. It was okay for his brothers to go easy on them. After all, they were all on the same side. Seeing Lu Feng's appearance, Su Wenchao suddenly slapped his head. Yes, why didn't I think of that? Let Feng Zi cooperate with him and fight for 30,000 to 50,000 rounds before being defeated. Wouldn't that be very honorable? Being able to last so long under the hands of an emperor is bound to be recorded in the annals of history in the future. I'm so stupid. How could I forget this? As he spoke, he kept slapping his head with a look of regret. Seeing his appearance, Mu Xueyan was speechless. At this time, Su Wenchao looked at Qi Yunqing again with an unfriendly gaze. Everyone says that I am shameless, but I realized that you are the real shameless one. No, I can't go easy on a lunatic. If he doesn't give up, then with one move, no. Then just use your aura to suppress him for me, ruthlessly suppress him. Although Qi Yunqing was also a monster, he was only at the mid-tier upheaval transformation stage. Compared to the mid-tier King Psychic Master from before, he was still lacking in many ways. Therefore, if Lu Feng wanted to suppress Qi Yunqing, he didn't even need to use any strength. Just his prestige and aura were enough. On the side, Lulu snorted coldly. How can you be so shameless? Can't you think of something better and work hard? Why do you have to take such an unorthodox path? I despise you. Hearing Lulu's words, the two extremely thick-skinned people actually blushed at the same time. The person who spoke was Lu Feng's younger sister, who was also their younger sister. To be said like this by their younger sister, it was too shameful, too shameful. However, in the next moment, Su Wenchao's eyes turned slightly as if he thought of something. He looked at Qi Yunqing again and suddenly accused him. It's him. He thought of all this first. It has nothing to do with me. Sister Lulu, if anyone is being wretched, it's him. It has nothing to do with me. After speaking, Su Wenchao tried his best to show a righteous appearance, but unfortunately, his wretched appearance couldn't be changed no matter what. After a while, Qi Yunqing also began to refute. The two of them kicked each other like this and began to curse at each other. Seeing that the two of them didn't have good expressions and looked like they were about to fight, Lu Feng simply didn't want to see it. He directly pulled Mu Shiyan and Lulu's arms and left. Seeing that the three of them had left, He Lufei and Kong Ting decisively got up and left this noisy environment. Seeing that everyone had left, Su Wenchao and Qi Yunqing could only temporarily put down their confrontation and leave with the two of them. The competition between the 4 years had ended. There were a total of 8 champions. Among them, the Federal University was still incomparably strong. They had swept all the champions of the Psychic Master competition for the 1st to 4th years. As for the warrior competition, they also had 2 champions, one for the 1st and the other for the 2nd year. The champion of the 3rd year's warrior competition was won by the Capital University, and the champion of the 4th year was won by an unknown university. Naturally, the winner of the 4th year's championship became the focus of countless people's attention. Soon, the information about this academy was thoroughly investigated by many existences. However, looking at the content of the information, these people were incomparably shocked. Because this school was only a small school on a planet, and this planet was only a 3rd-level life planet. Among the tens of thousands of schools that were invited by the Capital University, this school didn't exist at all. They were only qualified to participate after the students came and registered. Without a doubt, this scene was a ruthless slap to the Capital University's face. Everyone knew that the Capital University wanted to replace the Federal University's position as the #1 university, at least on the surface. However, out of the 8 champions, 6 of them were taken by the Federal University. Among the 2 champions that they were most confident in, one was even won by a university student that they didn't recognize. Such a scene was destined to be ridiculed by others. Of course, there weren't many people who actually laughed at the Capital University, because at this moment, everyone's attention was focused on the champion of the 4th year's warrior competition. Chapter 605. In the private room, Beigong Tianci looked at Lu Feng with a strange expression. After a long time, he finally sighed softly and said, "Young Master Lu is indeed amazing. Not only is your talent amazing, but you are also very accurate in judging people. This Qi Liang is indeed terrifying." These young masters were all here to participate in the final Pinnacle Grand competition. Therefore, they could not possibly appear in the previous 4 years' tournament. This was an unwritten rule in all the universities. Previously, after hearing Lu Feng's words, he had specially paid attention to Qi Liang. However, after watching all of Qi Liang's matches, Beigong Tianci finally understood how terrifying the monster Lu Feng had mentioned was. Qi Liang's strength was absolutely unparalleled, and he was much more terrifying than any of the monstrous geniuses he had ever seen. Gradually, he also believed the truth that Lu Feng had said. Qi Liang was a monster that belonged to the sixth-stage King Dao domain. Young Master Lu, this Qi Liang is definitely terrifying. I believe that if it weren't for you and the desolate Emperor this time, I'm afraid that he would have really accomplished a great feat in history. Lu Feng nodded lightly. As the King of Massacre, who was at least at the perfect middle stage, Qi Liang's existence was really incomparable to ordinary people. Furthermore, Lu Feng felt a similar aura from Qi Liang's body. It was a remnant of endless battles. Without a doubt, Qi Liang had also gone through countless battles. He was a terrifying existence that had once walked on the edge of death. Such an existence was even more terrifying and frightening. When the final Apex tournament comes, this Qi Liang and the desolate Emperor of the primordial Divine King clan should be my biggest obstacles. What Lu Feng had said was only an obstacle. In his heart and eyes, these two people were just obstacles. They were still lacking if they wanted to pose a threat to him. However, Beigong Tianxi did not understand this. I really did not expect that besides you, there would be two shocking kings of massacre in this Apex tournament. No matter which grand competition it is, this is completely incomparable. Hearing this, Lu Feng's heart skipped a beat. Thinking about everything he had experienced over the years, he felt an inexplicable sense of realization. Looking at Beigong Tianxi, Lu Feng thought for a moment before speaking. It's not just this academy tournament. Up until now, many battles have seen such a scene. No matter if it's a Psyche master, an alchemist, or a warrior, almost every academy tournament has a monstrous talent that has never appeared before in history. I believe that this is definitely not a coincidence. If it's only because of Wang Zhan, then it's also inexplicable. Beigong Tianxi's heart trembled slightly. However, after thinking about it carefully, he realized that this was indeed the case. He couldn't help but nod his head. Although all of this can be explained by Wang Zhan, after all, the era of Wang Zhan is full of geniuses and monsters. However, this Wang Zhan is truly unimaginable. In the past, there were at least 5 monstrous geniuses and at most, there were no more than 7 monstrous geniuses. But now, the number of monstrous geniuses born in the early stages of the Wang Zhan competition has reached a shocking number. Me, my father, the Crown Prince of Heavenly Dao, Wang Qingyun, the 31st Prince of the Serene Blood Clan, the Immortal King, the Demon King, and the new Serene Feather Rong Hua of the Serene Feather Clan. That's a total of 7 monstrous geniuses. This is already comparable to the peak of the Wang Zhan competition in any era. There was one more thing that Lu Feng didn't say. God monarchs and saint monarchs actually existed. It was just that the time for them to appear had yet to arrive. They should still be hiding in a certain region, waiting for the right time to reveal their fangs and shock the world. In that case, there would be 9 monstrous geniuses. And among them, the monstrous geniuses of this era are no longer the peak existences that need to be looked up to. This time, a taboo monarch has been born. You should know that the taboo monarch only existed in the primitive immortal devil era. In this era, including me, there are already 3 taboo monarchs on the surface. If the hidden divine king and the sacred king were included, then there would be 5 taboo monarchs. Since ancient times, the taboo monarchs had only been a legend. In this legend, there were only 5 taboo monarchs. But in this era, all 5 taboo monarchs had actually appeared. After reading the history of the immortal race's rise, Lu Feng knew about the existence of the taboo monarch. They definitely couldn't exist in one era at the same time. When the immortals were at their peak, they only had one supreme immortal lord, who eventually reached the supreme sovereign realm. In that era, there was no one else who was a taboo monarch other than him. It could be said that there were so many monstrous geniuses in this era that the appearance of 5 taboo monarchs at the same time couldn't be explained by a mere Wang Zhan. Wang Zhan's existence is merely the birth of an epic overlord. But as long as a taboo monarch doesn't die, as long as he can fight to the end, he can break through the final shackles and become a sovereign realm sovereign. There's something wrong with Wang Zhan. There's a huge problem. Lu Feng nodded gently. He knew that Beigong Tianci understood this. After listening to him, the young master of a top-notch first-rate family finally understood a lot. Therefore, this era will definitely be an era of change. It will be a golden age that surpasses any other era. At the same time, it will also be an era full of crises. The birth of a monstrous genius would definitely cause the entire era to enter a golden age. However, if this monstrous genius didn't succeed and ultimately failed, then this era would definitely become an era of true calamity. According to the records, before the end of every great calamity, there will definitely be a truly terrifying golden age. That golden age is the peak of every era. Now we are about to enter this era. It is very likely that we will be at the peak of this era. Could it be that the great calamity of the universe is about to descend? Beigong Tianci's face turned extremely pale when he thought of this. The great calamity of the universe was definitely something that would shock and frighten any existence. Even an epic overlord wouldn't be able to contend against the great calamity of the universe. Perhaps only an unparalleled ruler would be able to do so. No. According to the time, we shouldn't even be here now. Normally, we should only be in the early stages of this era. There should still be a very, very long time before the great calamity. At the moment, Beigong Tianci felt a kind of panic. This was the fear of the unknown. He had never thought about this before. Now that he heard Lu Feng mention it, he finally understood everything. Lu Feng looked at Beigong Tianci and sighed deeply. No matter what, regardless of whether the great calamity is about to happen, what we have to do is face it, face anything. If we want to do this, we have to be extremely powerful. Once we become unparalleled rulers, even if the great calamity of the universe really happens, it won't be a big deal. Beigong Tianci nodded gently. However, his face was filled with helplessness and complicated emotions. Unparalleled rulers. What kind of great existence was that? Among the countless eras after the end of the primordial immortal fiend era, only the human king of this era had clearly stepped into that realm. Others simply couldn't do it. Many of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, such as Shakyamuni Buddha, had also entered this realm through alternative paths. However, reality had proven that they weren't successful at all. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been completely obliterated by the great calamity of the universe. Beigong Tianci was only a genius. He couldn't even be considered a demon. In this life, breaking through all obstacles and entering the realm of the virtual king was already his limit. As for the life and death quasi-king realm, or even the universe supreme realm, he didn't even dare to think about it. Above the divine king realm was the time overlord and the epic overlord. Above the epic overlord was the unparalleled ruler realm. He was too far away from that realm. He didn't even have the qualifications to peek at it. Therefore, although Lu Feng wasn't wrong, it was the same as not saying anything to him. Alright, let's not talk about this anymore. None of us know what will happen in the future. We just need to increase our strength. The most important thing now is the Academy Pinnacle competition that will be held in a few days. To Lu Fenglai, this was the Academy Pinnacle competition, so it wasn't a big deal at all. What he was interested in was the final Academy Pinnacle competition. This was because those who would appear at that time would be the young masters of various large families. He might be able to get a lot of inspiration from their battles and could quickly condense his own technique. Speaking of the Pinnacle competition that would be held in a few days, the atmosphere in the room became better. They started to talk about the situation between the various geniuses and the young masters. It's a pity that I'm not qualified to participate in this pinnacle competition. Otherwise, I would really want to battle with those young masters. Qi Yunqing sighed slightly. Although he was a demon, his strength was still too low. Even if he participated in the pinnacle competition, it would be useless. Although those young masters weren't as talented as him, their realms were firmly suppressed. Once they clashed, he wouldn't be able to retaliate at all. There are only 36 spots for this pinnacle competition. Each of the 3 major academies has 10 spots. The remaining 6 spots are for the ordinary academies to recommend. Our academy recommended Lu Feng, young master Beigong, and the other 7 young masters. The other 3 are also very terrifying experts. They are monsters at the level of the Federation. Their strength has already reached the middle level of the perfect stage. None of them are people that you can fight against. So, you should just give up on that thought. Su Wenchao looked at Qi Yunqing with slight disdain and began to continuously attack him. Of course, it's not like you don't have a chance to fight with those young masters. The Academy Pinnacle competition will begin in a few days. As long as you can make it to the end, you can fight with Fengzi. If we're talking about the young masters of the large families, who can compare to Fengzi? So, you can fulfill your dreams. Hearing this, Qi Yunqing only rolled his eyes at Su Wenchao and didn't say anything else. Although Qi Yunqing was quite wretched in terms of wretchedness, he was still far from Su Wenchao's level. In fact, he couldn't compare to Su Wenchao no matter what. Thus, he decided not to say anything. Seeing Qi Yunqing close his mouth, Su Wenchao didn't continue to look for trouble. He ran to Lulu's side and began to coax this cute little sister. Seeing Su Wenchao's performance, Lu Feng helplessly smiled. His brother, the young master of the Su family, was good at everything, but he didn't put his heart into cultivation. If he was willing, then with the Su family's foundation and his monstrous talent, he would have been an intermediate or even advanced spirit reader. Chapter 606. When they returned from the garden room in the city center, it was already past 8 o'clock in the evening. After sending them back, Lu Feng returned to his room alone. When he was bored, he would go on the Heaven Network to read the news. The night passed quickly. The next morning, Lu Feng woke up early. This was because Vice Principal Huang informed him earlier. In the hall, the 500 students of the Federal University who came here stood quietly. It could be said that their battles were basically over. There were less than 100 people who could participate in today's competition. After this battle, only Lu Feng and a few others would continue to fight. Looking at the students below, Vice Principal Huang smiled with satisfaction. Although they lost 2 championships, the title of 6 championships was enough to make the Federal University satisfied. Moreover, he also understood that these 2 championships were not lost unjustly. After all, there were monsters among them. I'm very satisfied with your performance this time. The leaders of the university are also very satisfied. However, I hope that you don't drown in your own glory. You still have a long way to go in the future, and this is just an insignificant honor for you all. If you're really proud, then you'll lose everything in the future. Next, it's the year peak competition. This time, the rules have changed. It won't be the promotion mode like before. Hearing this, the people who were preparing to participate in the competition were slightly stunned. Previously, they had already inquired about their opponent. However, the rules had changed. This caught them a little off guard. Looking at these people's expressions, Vice Principal Huang smiled lightly. He knew that these people would definitely react like this after hearing this. However, thinking that the rules this time were jointly decided, Vice Principal Huang couldn't refute anything. Therefore, he agreed in the end. After all, the new rules were actually very beneficial for the 3 universities. Looking at everyone, Vice Principal Huang said, "The rules for this competition have changed temporarily. The promotion system for the last 32 people has been abandoned. It has been changed to a mixed battle system." Looking at everyone, he noticed that many people revealed an incomparably strange expression. He continued, "In other words, this will be a public group battle of 32 people. Of course, this is very beneficial for the 3 universities, especially the Federal University." Everyone knew this point. After all, the Federal University had the most people who could enter the year peak competition. A student hesitated for a moment before asking, "Vice Principal, I wonder how the other terms are calculated this time?" Hearing this, Vice Principal Huang smiled lightly. "Our path of cultivation has always been a single plank bridge. Since ancient times, there have been countless battles, and there has always been only one person who could reach the peak. The original intention of the rules this time's rule. Therefore, this time, no matter what method used, as long as he can fight to the end, he will be the final victor, and he will be the only victor's only's winner. All the rewards, including the second place, will belong to the sole victor, although everyone's is a lot's, but all's a lot. After all, in this case, the Federal University would definitely have an advantage. Alright, go and prepare in a bit. I don't need to say anything else. I'm sure you all already know how to fight." Many of the students who were going to participate in the competition nodded their heads lightly. Indeed, the Federal University's tradition was to be united. In a competition like this, they would be even more united. The grand competition this time was really suitable for the 3 great academies. Lu Feng vaguely thought of Qi Liang. In his mind, when he proposed this rule, he probably thought of Qi Liang the most. After all, Qi Liang was too heaven-defying. If this continued, he would definitely be the overall champion of the grand competition of the 4th years. This was unacceptable for the 3 great academies. However, when he thought of Qi Liang's strength, Lu Feng's lips curled into a strange smile. If these people really thought that they could rely on their numbers to suppress Qi Liang, then they were too naive. For those truly monstrous geniuses, numbers weren't a problem at all. Back then, when he was only a rank 6 monstrous genius as a psychic, he could perfectly suppress all the geniuses and monstrous geniuses. He could even directly kill countless of them. This was the difference in quality. Sometimes, numbers could make up for quality. But obviously, those people couldn't make up for it at all. Alright, you all can go. Remember, you are representing the Federal University. Everyone set off. The 4 years people all went to support their respective years' competition. As for the young masters of the 6 great clans, they came to support the second-year students. After all, Lu Feng was a second-year student. This time, the number of people watching was much more than the previous ones. The outside world already knew the competition's rules. This was definitely a new rule for them, so it attracted a lot more people this time. Moreover, many people had just received the news and were all flocking here. This year's inter-school competition was destined to be the biggest in history. Whether it was the number of students who came or the quality of the competition, they were all unprecedented. When Lu Fenglai arrived at the arena, the number of spectators had already reached an astonishing 200 million. Moreover, there was still an endless stream of people surging over. Of course, Lu Feng also understood that the number of people in the Year 2 competition couldn't compare to the Year 4 and Year 1. Even so, there were still so many people. This was simply shocking. The entire capital city only has 200 million permanent residents, but this is just a second-year competition and it has already attracted 200 million people. This is almost equivalent to the total population of the capital city. If you include the other 3 years, I'm afraid that the number of people here will exceed 1 billion. This is not any less than the number of people who attended the previous inter-school competition. When he heard Lu Feng's words, Beigong Tianci nodded lightly. To be honest, although he was the young master of an aristocratic family, his reputation was well known in the circle. In the eyes of ordinary people, he was like a god that was unattainable. However, he still didn't try to compete under the watchful eyes of 200 million people. When the inter-school competition starts, I'm afraid that the number of spectators will exceed the current number. At that time, it will probably exceed 2 billion. 2 billion. This was twice the population of a level 3 life planet. Such a number couldn't even be described as terrifying. To be honest, young Master Lu, I really admire you. I heard that back then, you completed a shocking battle under the watchful eyes of billions of people. If it were me, I'm afraid that the watchful eyes of billions of people would be enough to make me retreat. However, you were still able to perform to such an extent. Shocking the world, shocking the world. Beigong Tianci didn't deliberately hide his words, so many people heard him. They looked at Lu Feng, their eyes filled with a strange emotion. These people already knew Beigong Tianci's identity. He was the young master of a first-rate aristocratic family, the Beigong aristocratic family. He definitely wouldn't lie. Since that was the case, then this transfer student who didn't have much fame was actually such a terrifying existence? To be able to fight under the watchful eyes of billions of people, not to mention the pressure he had to endure, this glory alone was enough to be recorded in history. However, these people were also wondering if there had been any major competitions during this period of time. However, after thinking for a long time and even logging into the Sky Network to search, they still couldn't find any records of such a shocking competition. After all, a competition with billions of people watching would definitely cause a huge commotion in the Federation. At this moment, many people were filled with doubts. It was a pity that Lu Feng and the others turned a blind eye to their doubts. Looking at Beigong Tianci, Lu Feng smiled gently and was incomparably calm. If you're used to seeing those shocking scenes, then the attention of billions of existences is nothing. Lu Feng had seen a lot of the big secrets of the universe. He had experienced so much, so he didn't care if there were hundreds of billions of people paying attention to him, let alone a few billion. Beigong Tianci nodded, not fully understanding. Alright, it's about time to go on stage. After this competition, it won't be long before the real pinnacle competition. At that time, I hope you guys can do your best. After all, one of them is your old rival. Lu Feng's words made Beigong Tianci's eyes twitch slightly. He knew that the old rival Lu Feng mentioned was really his old rival. That was the young master of the Nanming aristocratic family. His status, talent, and resources were all on par with his own. The two of them were basically equal in strength. Therefore, it wasn't a problem to say that Nanming aristocratic family's young master was Beigong Tianci's match. Beigong Tianci nodded gently, his eyes filled with a solemn expression. The land of the Yellow Springs, the burial ground. This time, I will let everyone understand that the land of the Yellow Springs is placed before the burial ground because there is a real gap between them. Lu Feng smiled and nodded. He looked at Su Wenchao and Qi Yunqing beside him and said slowly, "Wenchao, Yunqing, I won't go easy on you guys in this competition. A championship like this wasn't any glory for Lu Fenglai. With his current status and reputation, his opponents should be the top monsters of the various races. However, the two of them understood that as the emperor, Lu Feng couldn't afford to lose. He couldn't allow failure. Therefore, even if this competition was unimpressive, Lu Feng still had to win. He couldn't afford to lose. Therefore, this time, Lu Feng couldn't let them win. Hearing this, Su Wenchao and Qi Yunqing both shrugged. When they knew that Lu Feng was going to participate in this competition, they had never thought that he would be the champion. Qi Yunqing had already won one, which was already considered pretty good. Therefore, the two of them didn't have any strange emotions. This time, there were 4 psychics and 5 warriors from the Federation Academy who had entered the competition. In total, there were 9 people. One had to know that there were only 32 people in the entire sophomore year's Pinnacle tournament, and they accounted for nearly 30% of them. This was undoubtedly very terrifying. Other than the Federal University, there were 6 people from the Capital University and 5 from the Government University. The 3 academies added up to 20 people, which was more than half of the total number. This completely reflected the terror of the 3 great academies and their dominant position. The group walked onto the stage, their factions very clear. The 3 academies stood together, while the other 16 students from the other academies also stood together. On the surface, it looked like the other academies had the most students. However, the real situation wasn't like that. Perhaps they had a lot of students, but their strength was a little lacking. Many times, numbers didn't decide everything. Chapter 607. The referee was a demigod from Capital University. In such a chaotic battle, only a demigod could completely control everything. He walked onto the stage and glanced at the 4 camps, but he didn't immediately announce the start of the battle. When he saw that everyone was ready, he finally announced the start of the battle. By the time the announcement was made, the demigod had already entered midair, watching the normal competition from afar. The battle had begun. If this was the advancement battle, there would have been a collision the moment the battle began. After all, everyone understood the principle of preemptive strike. However, this time, in this strange atmosphere, no one made a move. Everyone watched quietly, as if no one wanted to make the first move. The people who were here to watch the battle weren't idiots. They quickly understood everything. These people knew that if anyone made the first move, they would probably become the target of everyone's attack in the next moment. Without a doubt, this would be very disadvantageous. If they didn't have absolute strength, who would dare to make the first move? They looked at each other as if they were thinking about something. Finally, in the next moment, a student from Capital University walked out. Seeing this person, the people on the stage moved slightly. This was because they all knew this person. He was the second-year cultivator who took second place in this year's Academy Grand Competition. In the finals, he was a top genius who lost to Chi Yunqing in the same realm. These people all understood that he definitely wouldn't be the first to make the first move. Although the second-place strength was very terrifying, the first place was here. He didn't even say a word, so the second place was nothing. Sure enough, after he walked out, he didn't release his power. He just glanced at the place where the other schools were gathered and suddenly came to the Federal University's camp and the Government University's camp. Looking at the students of the 2 academies, this genius smiled and said, "The rules of this competition have suddenly changed. I think everyone is not used to it. However, since it has changed, we have to abide by it. I think you are now confused about how to make the first move." Some students had already nodded lightly. Seeing these people's movements, his smile became even more obvious. I think, although the Academy Tournament is a competition that tens of thousands of universities have to participate in, it is a competition that all universities have to participate in. But strictly speaking, this belongs to our 3 great academies. The clash between us is the true peak clash between academies. Therefore, I think it's good for everyone to kick those who are not qualified out first. Hearing this, the expressions of the 16 geniuses from the other academies changed drastically. They knew that Capital University was planning to join forces with the Federal University and the Government University to clear them out first. Then, the 3 universities would have an open competition. Although they had 16 geniuses, which was a lot more than the Federal University, which was the strongest of the 3 universities, once they joined forces, their numbers would surpass his side. Moreover, the combat strength of the geniuses of the three great academies was truly terrifying. Once the battle started, they wouldn't be able to withstand it. In the end, they would definitely be wiped out in an instant. It wasn't easy for them to come this far. They didn't want to leave in such a dejected manner. Unfortunately, these people could not say anything. This was because they knew that the genius from Capital University was not wrong at all. If they were from the three great academies, they would definitely agree with this method. Therefore, at this moment, they couldn't criticize or say anything at all. Sure enough, the most powerful genius from the government university walked out. He looked at the genius from the Capital University and nodded lightly, indicating that he had accepted the challenge. At this moment, everyone looked at the Federal University. In many people's eyes, the Federal University was the true power that would decide everything. After all, the #1 psychic and martial artist of the second year were all here. Moreover, the number of 9 people was also the most in a single university. Therefore, their attitude was the key to everything. At this moment, not only the students participating in the tournament on the stage, but even the audience below the stage, which had already exceeded 200 million and was faintly approaching 300 million, had the same thought. Su Wenchao didn't say anything. He just looked around expressionlessly. Qi Yunqing was the same. Many people thought that he was the one who could decide everything. After all, he was the #1 in the martial artist tournament. And at this stage, the #1 in the martial artist tournament was the strongest. However, Qi Yunqing wouldn't say anything. He knew that he wouldn't be able to decide anything. He looked at Lu Feng, and the students behind Lu Feng did the same. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Lu Feng. Lu Feng still looked the same as before. He was incomparably indifferent, as if he was just a spectator. One had to know that the number of people paying attention to him had already reached the level of 300 million. Under the attention of 300 million living beings, he was still so calm. It had to be said that many people were incomparably impressed by Lu Feng when they saw this scene. At the very least, they admitted that they couldn't do it. Upon seeing this, the genius from Capital University also understood who was the key to everything. He also looked at Lu Feng. However, his expression was incomparably relaxed. He knew that Lu Feng definitely wouldn't refuse, as this was the best way. Silence. Incomparable silence. Everyone was waiting for Lu Feng's answer. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, Lu Feng finally spoke. "I still have something to do in a while. I'm really interested in the 4th-year competition. Therefore, I want to leave early." Lu Feng's words caused everyone to be slightly taken aback. They didn't understand why Lu Feng would suddenly say such a thing. However, a moment later, the genius from Capital University laughed. He had misunderstood Lu Feng's meaning. "That's right. I heard that a monstrous genius named Qi Liang walked out of a small academy this time. I'm also very interested in going to take a look. In that case, it's settled. We'll clear them out first. Our 3 colleges will separate and compete with each other based on our strength. We'll end everything in the shortest time possible." After saying this, he turned around and returned to his camp. The students from the government university and Capital University adjusted their state of mind at the same time, as if they were ready to attack at any time. At this moment, except for Su Wenchao, Qi Yunqing, and Lu Feng, everyone was ready to fight. It seemed like the battle was about to break out in the next moment. Below the arena, countless people had already begun to boil. Although they sympathized with the 16 geniuses from the other colleges, this was the reality. In this world, the strong were respected. If they were strong enough, then no one would pay attention to them. Therefore, although they sympathized with them, they would definitely not say anything about it. The atmosphere at this moment was so dense that it was almost tangible. However, at this most tense moment, Lu Feng spoke again. But what he said next stunned everyone. I think you've misunderstood. What I meant was to finish the battle quickly, but I didn't mean to join forces with you. The genius was slightly stunned. In the next moment, he had already turned around. He looked at Lu Feng and wanted to say something, but Lu Feng had already spoken again. I am really interested in Qi Liang. After all, it is very rare to encounter such a monstrous genius. Therefore, I want to end the battle quickly. Of course, if you are willing to take the initiative to go down, it will save me a lot of trouble. Take the initiative to go down? What a joke! What a joke! The genius from Capital University looked at Lu Feng in disbelief, as if he hadn't heard what he had said. When he saw their expressions, Lu Feng smiled slightly. However, this smile was full of mockery. He had said all this on purpose. Lu Feng had already understood the genius from Capital University's thoughts. Our 3 colleges will join forces to clear out these 16 geniuses. Then, it will be a confrontation between our 3 colleges. However, I think that after they disappear, you will join forces with the students from the government university to fight against the federal university. Lu Feng's words made the genius from Capital University freeze for a moment. This was exactly what he was thinking. As long as those people were cleared out, he would join forces with the students from the government university. Although the 16 people were gone, there were still 20 people. Among these 20 people, almost half of them were from the federal university. If they fought alone or on their own, they wouldn't be a match for the federal university at all. Only by joining forces would they have a chance of winning. He believed that the students from the government university would understand this. Therefore, when they joined forces, there shouldn't be any problems. However, at this moment, Lu Feng had actually said this out loud. This made him feel a little strange. He didn't admit or deny it. There was only endless silence. Your way of thinking is not bad. You are using your intelligence to fight. Unfortunately, this speed is still too slow. It is so slow that I still can't accept it. The student from Capital University laughed. He looked at Lu Feng with a mocking smile. Then what can you accept? However, since you are unwilling to accept our alliance agreement, I can only give up on the federal university. After saying this, the genius walked over to the 16 geniuses from the other universities. The existence of the federal university is like a mountain to us. Since they have already given up on the idea of joining forces, are you willing? The 3 of us will join forces and clear out the strongest federal university. When the time comes, we will fight among ourselves. I believe that your 16-people team won't be afraid of our 11-people team. In the genius's eyes, the 16-people team and the federal university were about the same. Joining forces with either one was no problem. Before, they were going to fight, but now they want to join forces. This was undoubtedly a great irony. However, including the 300 million people in the audience, no one showed a mocking expression. Because they knew that this was the reality. Joining forces for benefits was nothing to begin with. Naturally, those students also understood this logic. Therefore, they agreed. They looked at Lu Feng with a mocking expression. The smile of the genius from Capital University was filled with a strange aura. This way it will be very fast. If you all go out now, won't it be done quickly? Lu Feng didn't say anything. His expression was still calm. Su Wenchao, who was beside him, finally walked out. He looked at the monster and said with a serious face, "That's true. It's much faster this way." Then, Fengzi, I will leave the rest to you. After saying this, under everyone's gaze, Su Wenchao actually walked down. Chapter 608. This scene caused everyone to be shocked and confused. Previously, Su Wenchao had left like this during the finals of the Psychic Master Tournament. Now it was the same. Could it be that he admired that person's strength so much? However, the shock was far from over. After Su Wenchao's departure, Qi Yunqing, who was publicly recognized as the last hope to become the champion, also left. He actually turned around and walked down the arena. When he reached the edge of the arena, Qi Yunqing suddenly stopped. He glanced at the people behind Lu Feng and said with slight displeasure, "What are you all still doing here? Fengzi alone is enough. Anyway, it doesn't matter if he leaves sooner or later. Give him some space and let him settle everything quickly." After saying this, Qi Yunqing walked down the arena without looking back. Behind Lu Feng, the students from the Federal University looked at each other. They didn't understand why such a scene would occur in this battle. At this moment, they were really hesitant. These people vaguely knew that Lu Feng's identity was honorable, his strength was strong, and he was the champion of this year's Psychic Master Tournament. However, they had never seen Lu Feng's true strength. How could they be at ease? How could they be at ease? However, the current situation didn't allow them to think too much. This was because the strongest Su Wenchao and Qi Yunqing had already left. With just the 6 of them, they couldn't do anything at all. The only thing they could do now was to trust Lu Feng like the other 2. Therefore, the 6 of them actually left. This was an unprecedented scene. In every tournament, these people didn't fight as if their lives were at stake. For these students, this was a supreme honor. However, at this moment, they left one after another. Such a scene caused everyone to be confused and at a loss. Looking at the actions of these students, Zhong Ling was expressionless. She really didn't care at all. This was because the moment Lu Feng entered the arena, the outcome was already decided. As long as he was there, nothing was a problem. Finally, when all the students came down, the people from the other academies stared blankly at Lu Feng. They didn't understand what kind of terrifying trump card this person had, to actually make their fellow students trust him so much, to actually be able to fight against all of them by himself. However, these people were happy to see such a scene. The student from the capital university looked at Lu Feng and finally laughed out loud. He opened his mouth and mocked. "Looks like your federal university saw through everything and let you be the scapegoat. They knew that there was no chance of victory this time. That's why I left you behind and let you bear everything. So this is your classmate." Ha 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 ha. Lu Feng remained silent as he listened to the laughter. However, the only difference was that he also smiled. However, it was an incomparably calm smile. Lu Feng looked at the remaining 27 people in the arena and nodded gently. Actually, they know me and understand me. They also know that this is the fastest way. After saying this, Lu Feng finally moved. Since they gave me face, I can't let them down. Let's end this quickly. After all, I don't want to stay any longer. One step, another step. At this moment, the faces of the students began to change. They were incomparably ugly because Lu Feng's words undoubtedly proved one point. That is, Lu Feng looked down on them, completely looked down on them. They had never experienced such a blatant disregard before. Now, under the gaze of hundreds of millions of people, how could they bear such disregard? Therefore, in the next moment, they moved as well. Let's send this arrogant and ignorant guy out first, then we'll decide the rest of the competition. No one had any objections. They nodded at the same time, gathered their power at the same time, and attacked at the same time. 27 people's power. This is the power of 27 geniuses. Such a mighty scene caused everyone's face to change greatly. Unfortunately, in the face of this terrifying killing power, Lu Feng ignored it, completely ignored it. His footsteps did not slow down at all. Finally, the killing power arrived. 27 streaks of killing power were scattered in a picturesque manner. Although they may not have come at the same time, in an instant, they all arrived. At this moment, all Lu Feng did was to gently wave his arm. In an instant, the smoke disappeared, and the sky and earth became clear. All the changes happened in a single thought. Was everything going to end just like that? It's over, it's really over. Before the audience could react, Lu Feng's invincible power was fully released at this moment. In an instant it filled every corner of the world. Powerful. This could no longer be described as powerful. Invincible. This is completely invincible power. Collapse, completely collapse. Everyone fainted in an instant. They were all suppressed by Lu Feng's incomparably terrifying aura. They were all crushed. It's over, everything really ended just like that. Such speed, such a result, made everyone stunned. It was not until Lu Feng shouted for the referee that they finally came to their senses. At this moment, these people no longer looked at Lu Feng with the same look of ridicule and doubt as before. They finally knew the reason why Lu Feng did and said this. All of this was not because of arrogance, not because of incompetence, and not because of despair. It was because of confidence. They had confidence in Lu Feng's strength from the bottom of their hearts. They believed that Lu Feng's existence was enough to determine everything. The result was like this. When the demigod existence descended, his gaze was incomparably dignified, and there was even a faint trace of trembling. Others did not know and could not feel it. But as a demigod, he could really feel it. At that moment, when Lu Feng released his majesty, he actually felt a kind of trembling from the bottom of his heart. He understood that even a demigod existence would be crazily suppressed, let alone these students who were not even perfect spirit masters. This kind of aura was definitely not something an ordinary demigod could possess. This was at least the power of a peak demigod. An 18-year-old peak demigod spirit master. Is this possible? Slowly descending, he looked at Lu Feng with an incomparably complicated gaze. In the end, he only sighed deeply and then announced Lu Feng's victory this time. Since then, the second-year champion of the inter-school tournament had been set in stone. The process and ending that no one had expected was completely over. Walking down the arena, Lu Feng looked at the other students who were also stunned. He smiled gently and slowly said, "Thank you for your trust, fellow students. Fortunately, I did not disappoint you. Otherwise, I'm afraid that this time, I would really have to atone for my sins with my death." Although they heard Lu Feng's joking tone, no one dared to speak to Lu Feng in a joking manner. This was because Lu Feng's performance had already exceeded the limits of their understanding and imagination. Feeling the reverence in these people's eyes and emotions, Lu Feng could only smile helplessly. He had already guessed this situation. However, Lu Feng did not feel any regret, because there was nothing to say or care about between him and these people. Therefore, their attitudes were completely indifferent to Lu Feng. He left directly with Su Wenchao, Mu Shuyan, and the others. The words that Lu Feng had said in the arena were not intentional lies at all. He was really interested in Qi Liang. Of course, this interest referred to his cultivation technique. Lu Feng knew that in addition to being the king of massacre, Qi Liang must have also mastered a powerful cultivation technique. He just did not know whether this competition would allow him to really use his cultivation technique. It would take at least 20 minutes to get to the venue of the fourth-year competition. Furthermore, this was the speed of a hover car. Fortunately, Lu Feng and the others were all powerhouses, so they directly used their own powers to start the journey. As a result, the journey that would have taken 20 minutes by hover car took them less than 3 minutes to reach the destination. This speed was also to take care of Mu Shuyan and Lulu. Of course, if it was just Mu Shuyan alone, their speed would definitely be much faster. Unfortunately, in addition to Mu Shuyan, Lu Feng also had to take care of Lulu, Kong Ting, and He Lufei. With Kong Ting and He Lufei, their speed was naturally much slower. However, when they arrived, the competition was still in progress. This was good news for Lu Fenglai. Using a powerful force, he forcibly opened up a path and barged in. As he stood next to the arena, Lu Feng's eyes lit up as he watched the scene unfold. The situation here was similar to where they were. The three major academies were the three major factions, while the other students formed a single faction. The four factions were facing each other, but they still had not made a move. When he saw this, Lu Feng smiled. He really smiled. That was because he saw Qi Liang standing quietly among the other academies. Qi Liang was very similar to Luo Yunyang's. The only difference was that Luo Yunyang had been ignored before, but Qi Liang was being eyed covetously by everyone. Lu Feng's current position was the closest to the front. He could vaguely hear the voices of many people around him. When he heard these people's words, Lu Feng smiled faintly. This was because he recognized the owner of the voice. Previously, in the center of the spaceship, it was the girl who had asked him about everything. These universities are really despicable. I think they are doing this on purpose to restrict Qi Liang's existence. However, do they really think this will work? Qi Liang's existence is not something they can easily compare to. How can we suppress him with numbers alone? Chapter 609. Lu Feng nodded in his heart. He knew that these people must have known about Qi Liang's identity and strength. Otherwise, they wouldn't have said such words. It seemed that they had waited for too long. Finally, the crowd below the ring began to feel dissatisfied. The number of spectators here was more than double that of Lu Feng's side. It had reached nearly 600 million people. The shock brought about by the combined voices of 600 million people was absolutely unimaginable. In the ring, those people had begun to feel slightly uneasy. After all, there were so many people watching at the same time. For people like them who had never experienced such a situation, this was definitely an unimaginable and terrifying pressure. Finally, it seemed that they couldn't endure it any longer. A perfect stage martial artist from the government university walked out. He looked at Qi Liang and said coldly, "Your strength is not something we can compare to. We admit this. So this time, don't call us despicable." After saying this, he turned to look at the government university. The perfect stage martial artist continued, "I agree with your proposal. If he doesn't go out, then we won't have any chance of success. So, let's do it now." The students from Capital University nodded gently and looked at the Federal University next to them. This time, the students from the Federal University didn't hesitate. They finally nodded gently. Previously, they were still hesitating. After all, it wasn't good to besiege a person like this. But now, under the pressure of countless spectators, they let go of everything and made such a decision. At this moment, the three academies had made a decision. The battle finally began. Without hesitation, the powerhouses from the three academies all walked out. They looked at Qi Liang and began to let their auras soar. This was a competition among the fourth-year students. Almost all of them were perfect stage martial artists. Therefore, the power produced at this moment was definitely not something that the second-year students could compare to. At this moment, the void shook. At this moment, the wind and clouds gathered. At this moment, time and space trembled. Countless power bloomed. It really felt like there was no law or natural law. Behind Qi Liang, there were less than 10 students from the other academies. They were truly terrified and were truly trembling. They could feel that, under the siege of the experts from the three academies, they were about to lose in an instant. If he wasn't careful, he might even die. This was something they could not avoid. Trembling. Endless trembling. His eyes were filled with fear. However, at the center of the endless storm, Qi Liang, who was bearing all the pressure, smiled. It was an indescribable smile, a smile that no one could see clearly except for Lu Feng. Lu Feng understood that this smile was called indifference. In Qi Liang's eyes, these people were nothing. Even if they added up, even if they all joined forces, would it be of any use? He, Qi Liang, was not afraid at all. A terrifying attack was about to land. However, in the face of all this, Qi Liang actually acted first. That's why he's a monster. That's because his combat strength has already exceeded the scope of ordinary people. By the time he finished speaking, Qi Liang had already appeared beside the perfect stage martial artist from Capital University who had spoken earlier. His killing intent soared through the sky, intimidating everyone. In an instant, the perfect stage warrior was completely defeated. Defeat, this was a complete defeat. Under such an attack, the perfect stage warrior was actually unable to react at all. In an instant, he was sent flying far away. The first person had failed. However, the killing would not stop just like that. The first person was only the first person. This person would definitely not be the last person. The terrifying killing intent had already descended and submerged Qi Liang's body in an instant. However, in the face of such a killing intent, Qi Liang only had one choice: to ignore it. He was completely disregarded. After passing through countless killings and walking on the edge of death, Qi Liang displayed his most terrifying side at this moment. In the face of so many existences, there was only one thing he could do: kill, kill, kill. One punch after another. Lu Feng could clearly feel that when Qi Liang attacked, he was obviously trying his best to control himself. Otherwise, a casual punch from him would be enough to kill any one of them. Even so, everyone who was attacked by him still suffered unimaginable damage. This was probably Qi Liang's intention. The second person, the third person, the fourth person, the fifth person. In an instant, the number of people in the arena decreased. The people from the 3 great academies were extremely frightened. When they had clashed with Qi Liang previously, they had already known how terrifying Qi Liang was. However, at that time, Qi Liang's terror was far from what it was now. It was only now that these people finally understood. It turned out that Qi Liang had actually hidden his strength at that time. He had still hidden his strength when facing so many strong enemies. The current him might be the real him. If they had known this earlier, they would definitely not have deliberately targeted him like this. However, it was all too late now. It was completely too late. After the last genius from the 3 great academies was completely knocked out, the arena was incomparably quiet for a moment. Yes, it was quiet. Many people knew about the change in the rules. In their minds, after the change in the rules of the Battle Royale, there would be countless killings and countless fierce collisions. However, everything that had happened today had completely overturned their understanding and all their previous thoughts. It turned out that a Battle Royale could be so simple. Qi Liang stood on the arena and quietly overlooked everything. When he swept his gaze across the geniuses from the other academies behind him, he paused for a moment. Those geniuses seemed to understand Qi Liang's meaning. They looked at each other, nodded slightly, and walked down the arena one after another. They had already understood everything from that glance. There could only be one champion in this grand competition. Obviously, Qi Liang would not give up this championship. Therefore, they consciously walked down the arena. In an instant, only Qi Liang was left on the arena. He stood quietly on the stage, overlooking everything. At this moment, he was the only protagonist in this world. He was the most important person in the entire world. The entire arena was silent. Everyone looked at him with admiration. Even the teachers from the other academies were the same. These people knew that the current Qi Liang was unstoppable. At this moment, he, who had completed a shocking feat, already carried a kind of momentum. The current him was the embodiment of greatness. Nothing could go against him or compete with him as an equal. The demigod referee descended and announced Qi Liang's victory. Finally, Qi Liang slowly walked down the arena under the gazes of hundreds of millions of people. Slowly, he left everyone's line of sight. I knew that Qi Liang's strength was not something these people could contend against. How naive. They still wanted to use such a method to go against Qi Liang. Now they have suffered the consequences of their own actions. There was no doubt that this method had not stopped Qi Liang. Instead, it had forged his terrifying reputation and made his name unparalleled for a time. Finally, Qi Liang slowly walked down the arena. He directly went to the side of his companions. However, at this moment, Qi Liang did not see the excited expressions of the people around him. At this moment there was only one person in his eyes. That person was Lu Feng. Ignoring the strange expressions of the people around him, Qi Liang went to Lu Feng's side. Up until now, Lu Feng still had a smile on his face. He looked at Qi Liang, and Qi Liang also quietly looked at Lu Feng. The two of them did not say a word, and this continued for a long time. After a long time, Qi Liang spoke first. "You're not disappointed, right?" When Lu Feng heard this, he shook his head gently. "Not bad. Your future is limitless." When he heard this, Qi Liang smiled. It was a smile that came from the bottom of his heart. It was a genuine smile that came from the bottom of his heart. The girl and the other two boys looked at Qi Liang with strange expressions. They couldn't understand how a random person's praise could make Qi Liang so happy. One had to know that even the praise of their incomparably mysterious teacher only made Qi Liang smile slightly, that's all. However, Qi Liang now had such an expression on his face. This made them feel very strange. However, Qi Liang completely turned a blind eye to the strange expressions of these three people. In his eyes, there was only Lu Feng's existence. "It's not easy for you to compliment me." Lu Feng smiled and shook his head. He had already understood from Qi Liang's words. He knew that Qi Liang probably knew his identity. Lu Feng turned around and left without saying a word. He knew that Qi Liang, who had been on the stage, had not displayed his greatest strength. That was not his most powerful state. If he wanted to know Qi Liang's true power, he would probably only know when he met the young masters of the North Underworld and the Nangong family at the Pinnacle competition. When he saw Lu Feng's figure disappear completely, Qi Liang finally returned to his original state. At that moment, his companion finally walked over. She looked at Lu Feng's departing figure and then at Qi Liang's back. Finally, the girl asked, "What's wrong with you, Qi Liang? I remember that even when the teacher praised you, I've never seen you so happy. I remember that he was the handsome guy we met at the center of the spaceship. Based on what you said, his strength is very terrifying. However, that shouldn't make you this happy. After all, he is still a member of the younger generation." When he heard this, Qi Liang shook his head slightly. "If you pay attention to him, then you should know his name." "His name is Lu Feng." "Lu Feng?" The girl was slightly confused. However, after a moment, her expression changed greatly. She looked at Qi Liang with an expression of disbelief. "He is Lu Feng? Could he be that Lu Feng?" Qi Liang smiled and nodded gently. "There are many people in the Federation called Lu Feng. However, there is only one person with more terrifying strength and talent than me. That is the Emperor, Lu Feng. I really did not expect that he would appear in this year's Great Academy competition. I heard from the teacher that the demon from the Huang family also appeared. Although he is not as terrifying as the Emperor, his realm is higher than the Emperor's. I'm really looking forward to the collision between the two terrifying existences." The Great Academy competition had completely ended. The final result shocked many people. The reform this time was already very surprising, and the result was beyond everyone's expectations. Of course, this was only unexpected for two major battlefields. In the Great Academy competition between the first and third years, it was done according to the normal order. The three great academies worked together to eliminate the geniuses of the other academies. After that, the three great academies would work together to fight against the other academies. In the end, the first-year championship was won by the Federal University. The third-year championship was won by the Capital University. Of course, if everything had developed in this way, then at most, it would have made people feel the excitement of the battle, and would not have caused countless people to still talk about it. However, the development of things was always unpredictable. In the Great Academy competition between the second and fourth years, there was a shocking change. The second-year Psyche Master Lu Feng completely suppressed everyone by himself. All of his opponents were unable to do anything. All of them fainted. The entire battle did not even last 10 minutes. The winner of the Great Academy competition was decided in 10 minutes. This had never happened before in history. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.